10 o'clock now, so if we can make a start, that would be appreciated. Just a couple of reminders quickly. Mobile phones, can we have them silent, please? There are members of the press attending the meeting virtually. Can I please ask those attending virtually to switch off your microphone to avoid any disruption during the meeting? No fire alarm. So if there is one, we'll make our way quickly to the nearest exit. I don't know who's online, but in the interest of brevity, various things, I'm going to possibly limit people speaking to members of this committee, but we'll just see how that goes and time wise, which nothing sinister about it, but we might have to just limit discussion to members of this committee. That's okay. But we'll just see how that goes. Please see Mark here. Okay, we'll move on to apologies for absence, please.
Apologies from Councillor Milton, Chair.
Thank you. Any other apologies? Okay, can we approve the correct record of the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of January 2026?
Happy to propose.
Thank you. Proposed Caroline Lever, Councillor Lever, seconded by Councillor John Petrinos. All those in favour of attaching those minutes? Thank you. Declarations of interest. Sorry, yeah. Oh, sorry, yes. Yeah. Item 3. Can I ask that we move item 14, which is a local nature recovery strategy, to straight after item 6. So item 14 becomes in effect item 7. Is that agreeable with everybody? Anybody disagree with that? Just yeah, thank you. A declaration of interest. And can I remind everybody that at the extraordinary council meeting on Thursday, there was a presentation given to all councillors who are serving two-hatted parish or town councillors and others who have got interest. So I don't think anybody else wants to declare a specific interest, Councillor Lever.
Yep. I mean, obviously the statement I made at full council on Thursday about my business and Tradeways still stands, but also on item 7, my business, which is now closed, was involved in one of those projects on that list. The reports for note, and I'll sit and listen through if that's okay.
Yeah, I'm hoping to speak at item 14, so I would just like to declare an interest as a trustee of age concern.
Item 11. Item 11.
Oh, item 11, sorry, I got confused. Sorry, item 11.
Any other? Simon, is that all right?
It's to do with the grants because we've got strategic grants paid.
So you're sorry, Council, you're part of an organisation that will receive a grant.
We'll hope to receive a grant, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So I suppose I mean, yeah. So I mean, we probably could have a sort of quick speech beforehand, but for the actual deliberation and vote, you'll need to leave that I would have thought just because being in the room gives the impression you could be influencing other council.
Okay, that's fine. I'll say my piece and I'll just wait outside. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You will get the words of interest. Item 5, I think it's all in part A, so we'll straight into part A. Councillor Crabb, Councillor to sit down. I was reminded, giving Councillor York a lift in this morning, of the special date it is today, February the 2nd. You know what day it is? It's Groundhog Day, which seems quite pertinent to what we're looking at next. In fact, I've almost become as proficient in the piano as Councillor Ricky Nice over recent days, I can tell you. And you have to see the film to realise what I'm talking about. So we're going to move into this item 5 again. And Mark Kentel, are you going to say a few words first, and then we're going to have some discussion again, and need to It's all been. So Mark, you okay to introduce it again?
Yeah, if you like, and I can start the ball rolling, I
Yeah.
suppose, but no doubt, I think there needs to be a good conversation about what happened on Thursday at Full Council. So the motions being discussed this morning is to, and forgive me if I don't get this quite right, but I think members wanted to discuss reinstating Schedule 2 customers and the refuse side of the Tradeways service. What I think needs to be discussed in more detail is exactly what Schedule 2 customers are and what that means. The controlled waste regulations, 1992 is where this comes from. Essentially, that legislation sets out that some organisations fall under Schedule 2 of this legislation. They're organisations that we can charge to collect our waste, as we do commercial organisations, but not all of those organisations are commercial. So some examples of that are schools, hospitals, prisons come under it as well. So you can be a Schedule 2 customer, but be non-commercial, but you can also be a Schedule 2 customer and be commercial. So a good example of those that are commercial are Airbnbs that are operating out of a small house. A lot of those are currently on our domestic rounds. They pay small business rate relief, so we charge them, but we pick up their waste on a domestic collection. They are commercial. We don't have to pick up from those organisations. A gentleman came along to Full Council on Thursday who asked the question about whether or not we were statutorily required to pick up his business because he's a caravan site, and caravan sites fall under the Schedule 2 definition. In his instance, because that was a small caravan site, we were charging people to stay in those caravans. We don't have a statutory responsibility to pick up his waste if we're asked to. If people were living there in those caravans as their permanent place of residence, then they would fall under the household definition of Schedule 2 waste. So we just need to be a little bit careful about what we're talking about when we say we're reinstating Schedule 2 customers. I think we need to be clear whether we're talking about all Schedule 2 customers or whether we're talking about household customers or commercial customers or both.
I'm sorry, Jack. Really hard to hear you when you lower your voice. So if we keep volume up, that's really helpful.
Okay, I will do my best. Sorry.
Thank you.
Have a deep one. Try and do my best. So that's important to think about. Schools are we currently collect from about 39 schools in the district. So just over half of all the schools that we're aware of. Majority of those, I think about 35 of those, we do recycling for, as well as refuse. And for most of those schools, we use our larger lorry to pick up their recycling because it's in big bins. Under the controlled waste regulations, we are obliged to pick up from schools if asked, and they haven't got any other contract in place or arrangements in place. We've had a look at the definition of the Schedule 2 waste, and our interpretation, just discussing it with Simon, is that isn't just refuse. That the requirement will be for us to pick up recycling as well as refuse. That is logistically possible in our domestic trucks. Currently, we don't use domestic trucks to pick up recycling or refuse from school. We use our trays, refuse rounds and recycling rounds. So if we moved to end our recycling service, but maintain picking up from schools, we would have to do quite a bit of work putting those schools onto domestic rounds and perhaps issue small boxes to schools. I know they do that in East Devon. We've been talking to them. So we can do it, but there will be disruption to the rounds, and that would be disruption to the domestic rounds. We'll need to potentially change well, almost certainly change the dates that we've let from those schools. There could be implications for fuel costs on those rounds as well. Even
I think
though
that's an important, sorry to interrupt you, Mark, but I think that's an important point actually, because I know when I got on the council in 23, and I think you'll probably agree with this, one of the biggest things that I was getting casework about were the domestic rounds. And I think it's to your credit and our credit as well, that we've actually turned that service completely round, and I don't get any complaints now. I know there's going to be the odd one when lorries break down and things, but I do not get any complaints about lack of pickup on the domestic rounds. So I think that's something to think about. If we're going to have to change the schedule too, and it might disrupt the domestic rounds, that is a pertinent point and one we should bear in mind, I think, because I think there's been a lot of good work done on those domestic rounds. So to disrupt that would be counterproductive, I think.
I totally agree. And about 2 years ago, back in the summer, we did we called it round optimization. It wasn't complete remodeling. It was just small tweaks to the domestic rounds. And it did cause a heck of a lot of disruption. That was almost a bit of a summer of discontent. And I'm sure my colleagues in customer services remember that, those horrible days where we almost had to switch the phones off because we're just overwhelmed with complaints, really, even if it's just one round that's disrupted. So there's quite a lot of implications to it, but we are saying that we want to carry on with Schedule 2. Then that does mean carrying on with schools, and we do have a statutory responsibility, if asked, to collect from schools, and that does include recycling. So need to bear that in mind. With the holiday lets and the like, I think the reason that we've sort of said it would make no sense, and I agree, there is no sense in not picking those up. They're on domestic rounds. There's no extra work for us picking those Airbnbs that up from those Airbnbs, and we get an income from it. And all of those Airbnbs that are paying us for us to pick up are being compliant. They're saying we are businesses and we're happily paying for our collections. But those are commercial customers, even though they're Schedule 2, they're just small business rate relief. They are commercial. So if we were to stop picking up their recycling, I can't see that there's any logic to that at all, because what are they supposed to do with their recycling? They'll have to go and find another provider. If we're continuing collecting their refuse, because we've said that we want to carry on collecting refuse, if they can't find anyone immediately to pick up their recycling, they'll probably start putting their recycling into their refuse. And they'll be getting a mixed message from us, because we'll be challenging them on that. And they'll say, well, if you carry on picking up our recycling, then we wouldn't have to put it in the refuse. So that's just some of the things that need unpicking with some of the suggestions or some of the motions that are being put forward. I think if all I ask today is if we are amending any motions and recommendations, it would be good to rebound that off myself and Paul, so we can actually give some feedback.
I had just one motion presented to me before this meeting so far. There might be another amendment or whatever, but without motion. So I think we'll open it up to any discussion. I don't want to do the Groundhog Day all the way now. And we've had the full discussion on Thursday. I think if there's any extra points that haven't been brought up yet, I know Councillor Lever wanted to bring something up, I think, and then Councillor between us. But if we can be not reiterating anything that we did on Thursday, I don't see the point of that. This has been revisited enough. I think we need to reach a conclusion today, one way or another, definitely. But let's not let it go into the whole morning. And Councillor Reaver.
Thank you, Chair. First thing I wanted to say is that I wanted to acknowledge that, as Councillor Clayton has mentioned, that certainly there has been a significant change from where we were maybe 5 years ago. Although I was first elected years ago, the number of complaints I used to get about missed domestic waste and recycling pickups was astronomical. It seemed to be embarrassingly often the same rounds. I had regular people who actually, if I saw them in the street, I kind of knew what they were going to say to me. And the work that has gone into turning that around, I think, cannot be underestimated. I would also like to extend my thanks and congratulations, really, and to all those involved in turning that service around. And I think, what we inherited when we took control was a pretty dire state. And I'm sure that the figures from customer services in terms of the numbers of calls and actual formal complaints would back that up. I don't remember the last time I had a domestic customer getting in touch with me to say, I've had my bins missed, but also not just the bins and the. Sorry, am I interrupting your conversation? No, I'll carry on then. Thank you so much. So I'd like to, without interruption, please. So I think the other thing that I used to get, and I don't get anymore, is about the assisted pickups, where there was quite a lot of problems. Now, I haven't had one of those in a long time, so I think we need to acknowledge the movement forward that has been made, and that's for everybody. Then I come to the trade waste, and I come to the discussions that we had on Thursday, indeed at the that you guys had at the previous Managing Resources meeting. And I think the representations that were made both by businesses at that meeting, but also to me and others via email, and maybe some phone calls from some people, has highlighted actually how difficult some businesses find this whole concept of not doing the full trade waste and recycling service. However, looking at the figures, it seems to me really clear that where the real problem in terms of the finances, or a big part of the problem with finances, is around the recycling. And the table on whichever page it is that sets out those costs, where are we? Page 53 on the agenda, make it, show to me that it's really clear that we have already made the right decision, that we will not be continuing the full trade recycling service, because we can't. However, what we heard on Thursday, and what we've heard both before and since then, is considerable concern from business. I think we all acknowledge that, in North Devon, the hospitality trade in particular, lots of small businesses, it's tough out there. It is really tough out there. That our role as a council is to first off do what we need to do from a statutory basis, but also to do what we can feasibly to support other interests, other activities, and so on and so forth within our district, but in a way that does not cost the taxpayers, individual taxpayers across the whole district. It should not be costing them money. So we've been thinking quite a lot about how we do all of this, and I do have a motion which I have presented to the leader of the council, which I'd like to propose now. The motion that I'm putting forward is that the council will continue to operate a trade waste collection service to all trade waste customers in North Devon. The recycling service will not be reinstated for other businesses. We will look to reintroduce the Schedule 2 trade household waste and recycling service that can be collected alongside domestic recycling. The service will be operated and charges will be set at a level to ensure that the service produces a surplus, or at the least no net loss to the council. There will be regular reviews of the service via a task and finish group and reports back to Strategy and Resources Committee. That's my motion I'm proposing.
Sounds very similar. So like move to the like it.
Yeah, listen, we're gonna have to just be careful here now and just, you know, if you want to put your hand up, I'm not an autocrat when it comes to chairing this. I'll let anybody speak. But please, you know, let's do it in the confines of civility. We've got Councillor Trinos, I think, next, and Councillor Crabb, and then Councillor Julie Hunt and Councillor Ricky Knight. Councillor Trinos.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Condell, for explaining part of Schedule 2. But point out that the minute extract that was sent around doesn't talk about Schedule 2. I mean, apart from the beginning bits, part D says the recommendation is that Statutory Resources Committee look again at the viability of continuing to provide trade waste collection service on a full cost recovery basis as the minimum, which I think might have been what Councillor Lever moved.
I think it's just covered.
And so it, without any reference to, I'm a bit unsure about what that motion was that, because of 23.3.
Would you like me to reread it for you?
Yes, I would, please, yes.
More than happy to do so, in the interest of clarity. Okay, so the council will continue to operate with chairs.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, head goes on.
Yes, the council will continue to operate a trade waste collection service to all trade waste customers in North Devon. The recycling service will not be reinstated for other businesses. We will look to reintroduce can't actually even read this writing I've put down here, to reinstate the Schedule 2 trade household waste and recycling service that can be collected alongside domestic recycling. The service will be operated and charges will be set at a level to ensure that the service produces a service or at the least to no net loss to the council. There will be regular reviews of the service via a task and finish group and reports back to Strategy and Resources Committee.
I think the important thing to remember in all of this, and I admit, you know, I've made mistakes on this, and it's been very illuminating over the last few weeks. I found out things I didn't know about and I didn't know about. But the most important driving force, as far as I'm concerned, is that the council taxpayer does not pick up a single penny to carry on this service because it's been losing money. Council taxpayers have had to subsidise it over years. It's not just the last 2 years. If you go back in time, there's been plenty of years where it's been subsidised. And this motion, I think, puts it quite clearly that we will reintroduce trade waste. We will carry that ongoing. But, and it's a massive but, we will not allow a single penny of council taxpayers' money to subsidise the service. If it's not working, it goes. And we're going to have to be very closely monitored on a monthly basis. And if it's failing to live up to standard, or they're not prepared to pay the money and they're leaving droves, because this is going to necessitate a big increase to cover all costs. Absolutely. We need to be very clear with businesses. This will necessitate a big increase. Now I've got. Can I just let other councillors speak, Mark, and then you come in?
I think it's really important that the wording of that motion, that will mean that the Airbnbs that we're currently picking up from on the domestic rounds, they are not household Schedule 2. They are commercial Schedule 2. So with that motion, we would have to stop picking up there.
So we can change it.
So it needs to, the wording of that needs to be looked at.
I'm just writing it out again for Bebs and maybe it could go up on the.
Yeah.
In fact, I could no, I can't email it because there's no signal.
John?
Yeah, I think, Chair, just to add to what Mark was saying, so I think where Councillor Lever's proposed that the trade Schedule 2 household is retained, the wording and trade household and commercial needs to be added into that wording, so that it picks up the properties that Mark's just alluding to. Else those properties would be missed out of that. So it's important for clarity that they are included in there if you are
Yeah.
in that.
Can I suggest that possibly Councillor Caroline Lever goes and sits next to Mark Kentel when you just look at it together whilst we're taking other discussions? I don't know if that's a possibility, just so we can out to the end. Councillor Petrinos has spoken, hasn't he? Councillor Crabbe, I think, was next.
Thank you, Chair. There has been an element of politics in this, as we know, but I think to be fair to Councillor Lever and this is, you know, I spoke nicely to Councillor Bell the other night, so it does happen. I think what Councillor Lever has done is capture, I think, the guts of Councillor Prowse's motion from Thursday. And I'm happy that the fully costed increase and that the regular reports from my motion has been included. I think so. We're sort of somewhere, I think, and a cross-party agreement on this. I think there are some issues. I think Councillor Jones is going to do a deep dive into how the costs got so bad and everything, and that's it. But that's not for here today. He's going to, that will be rumbling on in the future, won't it? So I'm, if that's not been seconded yet, I'm almost inclined to second it. I think it captures most things that have been discussed on Thursday night.
I wasn't quite clear though. Are you seconding it or not?
Sorry? Yes.
Right, thank you.
Should we make sure the wording's clarified? before
Yeah.
We will do that.
Oh, very plain.
We'll revisit it in a minute. Councillor Julie Hunt and then Councillor Ricky Knight.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was, thank you, Councillor Crabbe. I was going to second it, but then when I was listening to Mark as well, yes, with the added bits in, that made sense. So I was going to wait for the full thing, but I'm happy for you to second it as well, be nice. And the other thing you raised as well with Peter and Councillor Jones, yeah, that's obviously not for this meeting, and that's something I think we'll be having a conversation with later on, perhaps in the week. Thank you.
Councillor Ricky Knight.
Thank you, Chair. I find myself on an interesting journey, like our Prime Minister, in terms of heading for a U-turn. And as you remember, in December, I was a lone voice, not be lone mate, supporting the proposal from the officer to accept it in full. And then the following month, I made my statement, prepared statement, setting out all my reasons for supporting the recommendation. So I'd make it groundhog, but I didn't say anything on Thursday, nor did I say anything at full council. I've been listening and learning and U-turning. The fact is, we all do that now because we're becoming more and more aware of the cost implications, the cost of a new vehicle, the fact that the service is loved, and that was, you know, that was on Thursday night. I love it.
Definitely prevalent on Thursday night. That's been one of the things that I hadn't appreciated perhaps as much, that they do appreciate services provided. You're quite right. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay, sir. So on Thursday, I was listening. I kept my mouth shut for a change, and I was attracted to Councillor Maskell's proposal. The fact that I voted in favour of it made no difference, because the thing has become, no offence to anybody, politicised, and that in a sense is inevitable. So it has to be amicable and politicized. That's the case here. I do have a question for Mr. Kentel in a second. So basically, it's a question of cost, it's true, and then keeping a good profile for the business and the public. I suppose I'll cut to my question now, so it's not too groundhoggy to Mr. Kentel, and just to say, in terms of upping, we have found out that businesses do not mind a significant percentage increase in their charges, and I'm just wondering, because I'd be in favour of retaining the recycling service too. So indirect two questions therefore to you, Mark. Is it viable to maintain this service given a significant increase, even though we don't know how many customers will withdraw because of the increase? But I very much doubt it's going to be very, very many, because of the popularity of the service and the regularity and the fact that you've turned this service around. You're important, and as such, congratulations on that as well. So is it viable? Could we continue with it? And what what cost, if you like, or what chance that despite the amendment on the table, what chance of retaining recycling as well? Since what you said is true, everything that they can't recycle is going to go in the black bin. Well, not everything. But.
Before Mark answers that, I mean, I'd just like to say a little something about that, because I think there was general consensus before that the recycling is generally unaffordable, and the reasons for that, as far as I can see, is the cost of the vehicle, which will not be available until 2027 in the vehicles. That would necessitate a initial outlay of hiring extra vehicles from a fleet, which would be well in excess of £100,000. And by any nature, that's initially has to come from the council taxpayer, and that's why I'm against it.
Yeah.
And I think we did go down the route, didn't we? That is generally unaffordable. And I think this is a good working compromise.
Yeah. I'm asking
trade ways. I'll let Mark answer, but that's my view on that, and I'll come to Councillor Maskell in a minute. Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, Councillor Knight, what you're asking me is whether or not I believe that we could make the recycling element work as well. I've got to say, the small sort of sample that we consulted with, that I know was criticised, but I think it gave us the answers to some of the questions that we wanted answered. What came out overwhelmingly was that, as you say, that people would be prepared to pay more to us, because it wasn't just about cost, it was about the service they were getting as well. I think we did ask members to come back with questions as a result of conversations they had with their constituents, and Councillor Maskell and Councillor Wilson and others did come back with some of their findings. And again, it was saying, that people might struggle to find somebody else, and they therefore will be very happy to increase their prices to us. When we first put the report together, we showed that I think 25% increase would cover the cost of our leasing of a new recycling vehicle. We did include in that the short-term leasing of split loader lorries as well. I think since the original report was put together, those original figures were put together, things have changed, and we would need to put up prices by more than 25%, which was in the original report. However, speaking to the businesses, and I think certainly when Ollie produced the petition, we got again this resounding message from our customer base that they would pay more. I mean, a lot of them were saying that to go across the private sector, they're looking at 70–80% increase. So, in answer to your question, I would happily reinstate the full service. I think we know we can get split loaders on short-term lease hire. So on Thursday night, unfortunately, we ran out of time, but members were right. On the new lorry, normally we would lease over a 7-year basis. That's where you get the best deal on your lease hire. But we could, we've got two years left as a local authority. We're getting an overwhelming message from at least 1,500 businesses that they would like to stay with us. They value our service, and if we did short-term lease hire of these split loaders and increased our prices to cover the cost of that lease hire, then I think we can carry on with the full trade service without a loss. But there's no guarantees in this world.
We've been here before, we keep this come down the road, and we've had assurances that the charges that we've put up in the past will cover it, and it hasn't been.
I know. I'm just giving it. I mean, this is my personal view, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate being asked for that because to be honest, with some of the motion that is being proposed this morning, as I said at the start of today's meeting, it is going to cause us an awful lot of jiggery pokery with the rounds, and the best one in the world is going to take a while for that to settle down and for us to understand what the costs are involved in some of that. So I'm sure all of you have. I lost quite a lot of sleep over this, and I've been thinking about it a hell of a lot. And but it's unusual to get I mean, if that petition for me was a real positive, it's quite unusual for such a large number of people to come to us and essentially plead with us to keep something going. And if we have a really good go at it, I think we can. It wouldn't be an irresponsible loss-making exercise. I think we could have a look at it again this time next year or maybe in December and see how we're doing. If we're losing money hand over fist,
We move on to councillors.
that's my.
Can I follow on from that, please, sir?
I want to bring in others, councillor Downs, then I'll
Still
come
like
back,
to come
I'll come back to you. Yeah.
in response to the answer to my question. Is that okay, sir? Yeah. I'm a very good councillor. I've been well trained on planning to listen to my officers and take their advice. And as such, I'd like to let the council, let the SNR committee know that I'd like to make an amendment, please. And I, in deep respect to all the work's gone into your proposal, I'd like to propose that we reinstate the full service.
I'd like to second that.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry to force you to give me a chance to say something.
Yeah, Chair, if I may, just procedurally, councillor Lever was still clarifying the wording of the motion.
Oh, there it is.
And it hasn't yet been seconded, although there's an indication that it might be. So we need to resolve that motion before we deal with the amendment. Can't have an amendment without a motion.
I second the motion.
Okay, does anybody, well, I think we need to move to a vote.
Nice to speak.
So I thought you were proposing something else, councillor Massimo. Yeah.
Well, from what I was going to actually say, I think have changed now. I'm hearing Mark's statement, and I would like to support Ricky. Councillor Knight, this is. I know we've been round and round and round with this, but this does slightly change how we look at this, and you know, this alternative, this proposal from Councillor Lever is not without its problems and issues for the staff and for the service as well. So we could be really brave here and go for it and make this a viable proposition. I just think we need to really consider what Mark Quintal has just said. Thank you.
Yeah.
At some stage in the debate, Chair, would you like John to run through some of the figures that we might be talking about in terms of fee increases?
The useful now.
Yeah. So members, I think going back to what we originally presented back in January, obviously you had a table that looked at the existing customer base and what you would need to do in order to break even. So if you were retaining the whole service, that was looking at a potential 25% minimum in order to break even. Obviously, if you were looking at what's been put forward earlier this morning in terms of just retaining the refuge element, that has obviously different consequences. We alluded to at the meeting in January that might be somewhere around 7 to 8%, but that modelling has changed because obviously we would need to put more officer time more officer costs within just doing the trade refuge element, because we need to make sure that people aren't putting recycling into black bins, etc. So I have got some table of modelling which I'll run through with you shortly. But obviously what you're now referring to is reinstating the whole service, which again originally was looking at a 25% increase. That would be a lot higher now because obviously the position has moved since January in terms of customer base, because obviously the customers we had back in January, as we touched on Thursday night, some of those customers have council contracts. Some are in discussions with other providers. Now, what we don't know is the exact numbers that potentially we might have lost, because obviously we've said that 300 have been in touch with another provider. How many of those 300 we don't know are going to them or are in just early discussions and might still be with us waiting for the outcome of these deliberations. But on the basis of a reduced customer base, you would need to put the prices up if you were going to retain the whole service. So on the basis of losing, for example, 20% of the customer base, you would need to put the prices up for the whole service by around 55 to 60%. If it's 30% loss on customer base, you'd be looking at probably somewhere between 75 to 85%. But again, we don't know where that customer base is. So I would err on the side of caution in terms of customer base and assume probably on the higher level. And therefore you'd be looking at quite a significant cost increase for doing the whole service. But those cost increases are in line with what obviously our customers are facing by looking at the alternative provisions. So it's in that same ballpark that, as has been alluded to, the value that people have placed on our service, they are experiencing that when they're going to talk to competitors.
Which of course might lead others as well to leave the service after as well. So we've got no way of knowing just how many we're going to end up with, which is why I think the issue.
That's the sort of price rises you would be looking in terms of retaining everything refuse and recycling. So you'd be looking at somewhere between probably a 50 and 60% rise, somewhere between maybe a 75 and 80% rise. And if you were going ahead with that, I would err on the side of caution and go with the higher amount, because you want to make sure you're protecting the budget. If obviously the retention was better than that, and you may find you actually attract more customers to the business because of the publicity it's gained and the value that service users have placed on the service. So we would need to obviously put the prices up by quite a high amount. If that meant that the budget ended up with a surplus over the next year or so, then obviously when you come to look at price rises next year, you may obviously put prices up by so much moving forward to 27, 28. That's obviously retaining the whole service. The alternative is obviously the motion that's been put forward earlier, which is around not doing the recycling element. And again, that has differing implications based on retaining the trade refuse element. If I can just hand these around, I can hand those to members.
This is a chart that shows how much I think that's been increased to variable levels depending on the number of customers that we lose. Whilst that's being circulated, I want to move to a vote fairly soon. So Councillor David Knight, Councillor Malcolm Wilkinson. Yeah, sorry, David. Councillor Wilkinson.
Worth me just going over this one?
Yeah, sorry, I will wait just.
So remember what's coming round. Obviously, I've touched on the potential increases if you were looking to retain the whole. If you were looking at just retaining the trade refuse elements, then what you have in front of you is the refuse element that originally came in the report back in January. So that first column that says original, that was the original net cost of providing just the trade refuse service. At the very bottom, you'll see a net cost of 52,000. That's been revised for 26-27 budget because what we have included is that the officer time in terms of just providing the refuse element would require more officer time, because obviously if there are no recycling collections taking place, there may be some requirements to support customers to ensure what's going into the refuse containers is its refuse and not recycling or food waste being thrown in there. So an additional cost has been shown in there for that additional officer time. That brings the net cost at the bottom to 91,977. That's on the basis of that same customer base that we had back in January. So what I've just been talking about is obviously that customer base that has changed since January. Those numbers we were looking at the other day potentially were around 300 to 400 customers who are already in conversations with other providers. That would equate to around a 25 to 30% customer base reduction. So if you were moving ahead with just doing the refuse element, again, I would err on the side of caution and probably look at the 40% customer reduction column, because assuming that those customers did migrate across, potentially you would then be looking at a 40% customer reduction. At the very bottom there, the last row at the bottom shows the price increase you would need to adopt if you had a 40% customer reduction or a 30% customer reduction. You would therefore be looking somewhere between 34% and 46%. If that customer reduction was higher and at 50%, it would be that last row in terms of 64% price increase. So it'd be a slightly lower price increase than if you were doing the whole service, because obviously the main cost is on the recycling element. Obviously, we would have potentially need to build in a customer reduction in terms of that price increase. So if you were asking me for my views today, I would probably go with the 40% customer reduction to err on that side of caution. And you would be looking at potentially then a price increase of 46% on the existing prices that you have for trade-based.
Thanks, John. Councillor Wilkinson and Councillor David Nutt.
Thank you. I'm going back. I'm sorry. I would like you to explain to me a bit more detail about this Airbnb holiday let. I mean, obviously, this is a concern I've had for quite some time, and I think Councillor Maskell shares with me as well. The collection, they all pay for it, yeah? Is what you say. Would that be just the black fortnightly bin, or is that the weekly recycling as well?
It is, yes.
And that would all continue. Because this is the concern that I'm getting through from obviously the tourist area in which I live, that we know where the Airbnbs and the holiday lets are, and weekly they're being picked up as they were this morning.
Yeah, with the motion that Councillor Lever has put together this morning, that would cover their recycling and their
so they all pay for that.
Yes.
And how does that work with the registered business sector? I thought business rates go to central government.
In terms of the business rates they're paying,
Yes.
yeah. So the business rates they pay, obviously, we collect a proportion of that goes back to central government. We obviously get a proportion of that business rates locally.
So we would collect enough to cover the recycling, etc.
Yeah, I mean, some of those businesses get small business rate relief, in which case then they don't pay the business rates. Obviously, they get the full relief, and we get that back from government via a Section 31 grant. So in terms of the retained business rates, we get a proportion of that business rates back. As Mark alluded to, the income that we would get by having to charge those businesses at a small business rate level means we'll get a recycling income, as well as obviously the level of business rates they pay as well. As the motion alludes to, every property that's currently getting that collected via the domestic rounds would have that continued under the motion that's in front of you this morning.
Thank you. That's the armour I need to go back. Thank you.
Councillor David Nutt and Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, we've gone back over this several times, the risk to the council about purchasing the vehicle or purchasing vehicles. And I think fully committing and purchasing vehicles, and you've alluded to the 7-year lease, puts us in an ongoing position.
One year.
So you're sort of rolling 1 year, but still those costs are there. And if customers drop out, we are then in the same position in a year and a half or 2 years where customers dropped out, and we're still putting the finances, we're costing the public that money. I was just
yeah. I mean, essentially, what I'm saying, Councillor, is why not run it for 1 more year and then have a look when we see how it looks with the balance increases. That is personal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it is a risk. Councillor Crabb.
I just like to mention these some of the figures that John's been talking about there. We wrote, I understand, to 1,500 and something businesses saying, sod off, we're stopping. And we're surprised that 300 are looking at other suppliers. I mean, that's incredible that only 300 have bothered to get off their arse and do so. So
I think there's an element there, Councillor Crabb, you don't want me saying is that people were waiting.
Exactly that. But what I'm saying is so are the 300. So this assumption that 40% are going to wander off is nonsense. So 300 people have gone and rung up an agent, see what the options are. They haven't rung up to say, can I have a bin delivered next Tuesday, please? So the fact that you've got proposed 40% of your customers are going to go, I think I cannot see that. You've only got 20% that have even rung up to see what phone numbers are there. So 40% seems to be an extremely pessimistic view. That's my only point on those numbers.
I mean, I do know for a fact that some have actually chosen. I mean, South Molton, for example, Parish Council has chosen and got another organisation to pick up their waste at the same cost as what we were charging, which everybody says.
So on Thursday night, 20 customers had changed as of Thursday night.
Yeah, but the contracts don't finish yet, so they won't have. Just.
I just want to clarify some figures, if that's all right.
So I did.
When we first started looking into this, we were told we had 1,800 Tradeways customers. That was figures from sort of middle of last year. In actual fact, by the time it was brought to full council, we were already down to 1,500 Tradeways customers. And we're now 1,520, and we've now lost 20 more of those. So we've already lost 300 customers. Another 300 have actually asked our broker for information. How many more have actually gone, well, I don't need to ask a broker, I can use Google, because people are perfectly capable of doing that. Some of them say, well, I don't actually need the broker. So we don't, it's a huge unknown. I just wanted to clarify figures. That's
in my own head, I was allowing up to an hour. I was hoping we'd get it done before, and it's now 10 to 11. It is an important issue, but I think we need to, we are going over it and over. We need to look at the motion and the amendment and vote accordingly, I think now, unless anybody's got any real burning issues that don't think have been resolved yet. Councillor Harris has been very quiet. With
I'm sorry, Chair, I just can't believe what I've heard this morning. I mean, we could have done this in January, this proposition, but I'm now listening to Mark Kentel. You know, I'm very tempted to support the amendment. I think that, you know, if we're talking about getting hold of the trucks for a year, the financial risk to this council is quite slim, isn't it? We, you know, halfway through the year, the position with the performance reports that we get will be clear as if it's not going to work out. So we're not risking 5 years or 7 years. We're only risking probably this next municipal year. So, but yeah. Damascus Road is what I'd say about it, yes, at the moment.
Right, can we move to the motion then? Is it, I can't see the screen very well.
It's on the screen, Chair. You deal with the amendment first. But just very quickly, in relation to the motion, can I just ask that the wording be slightly amended so that it says in the second paragraph, and types of commercial waste that are currently collected alongside domestic recycling. So it's not restricting it to the current properties that we collect from, but the types of property that I use customers.
Councillor Levy, is that okay with you?
What is the implication of that?
Because if another area, if we limit it to, if we go with the original wording, and commercial waste that is currently collected, there might be an interpretation of that, which is that we're only going to collect from the current properties that we're collecting from.
So if any Airbnb, for example, said, hey, I'd like to set up, I'd like to have trade waste. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Happy to accept that.
Just sorry, members, there are others that, you know, we've got some pubs, for example, that are really out in the sticks that are picked up with small box collections.
Yeah, on the vans, yeah.
Yeah, so that would be covered by that. Yeah.
Types of commercial.
Yeah.
Sense, I think that's what
Yeah, so we deal with the amendment first, Chair.
Councillor Ricky Knight, do you want to just repeat your amendment to this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I propose that we vote to accept the full reinstatement of the full service. Continue with the full service.
Cost neutral.
Yes, but those added words which are spot on and no loss to the council taxpayer. Can someone put that into better words?
Well, that's the amendment, so.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Bev? Thank you.
Does the amendment need to be seconded? Councillor Maskell's seconding it. All those in favour of the amendment?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Any abstentions?
Go again then.
Sorry, something didn't add up with the figures there. Can we just take that vote again? All those in favour of the amendment?
2, 3, 4, 5.
And all those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
And any abstentions? Thank you. So we'll move to a substantive, non-amended motion. All those in favour of the motion?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
All those against? Abstentions? Thank you, thank you very much, councillors and officers for that. I mean, one thing I would like to say on that, and you know, I think Councillor Price said we could have started this out in January. Yes, and if that's partly my fault, I apologise, but I think it's something that needed to be looked at in as much detail as possible. I think one thing we can be proud of is that democracy seems to be working here. We have listened to the residents. It was good to see that the 1,000 names, even though some of them seem to be in strange places, exotic places like Egypt. But at least it did its purpose, and it was debated. I think lessons can be learned, and there's no doubt I've learned lessons from this, and I'm sure other councillors and I think officers are going to learn some lessons from this as well.
Very, very quickly, in an effort to minimise the damage on this, can we now urgently, I take it it's logical that we get urgent letters out now to all 1,520 while they still exist customers?
Thank you, Councillor Crabb. Yeah, I mean, this is an issue, and we need to handle it delicately. We need to get communications on it, and we need to tell those businesses exactly where they stand. And hopefully by, I mean, email certainly initially, but then follow up with a letter. Can we have assurance that that will be done? Perhaps today. Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. Sorry to hear. Thank you. And you know, apologies to those businesses who have been up in the air about not knowing what. Yes, having faults in the process, but we've got to where we want to be now. Right, we can move on now. Thank you, Paul and Mark. We're on to item 14. We brought that forward. It's a very important document, and Mark Saunders, who's going to I mean, councillors will have read this, Mark, so if you could just give a brief overview of it, please, and then questions and concerns afterwards, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously, the LNRS is, or Local Recovery Strategy, is a huge body of work that's taken place over the last year or two, led by DCC, with all supporting authorities across Devon contributing significantly, and all the nature bodies as well. So huge amount of contextual information there related to habitat and species, and principal importance across Devon, and absolutely massive body of work that's on mapping, which is really, really important to obviously us as a local council in informing planning decisions and informing the delivery of biodiversity net gain. So that mapping, key point to the mapping really is it informed by all the different elements of habitats and species. It produces areas of opportunity for habitat enhancement and nature recovery across them. So the recommendations really quite simply, compared to the previous item, just for the finalisation and publication of the draft LNRS concerns. And if there are any sort of last minute amendments following recent consultation, that we have delegated authority to support those.
Thank you, Mark. And the recommendation on page 426, 2.1, 2.2, but I'm sure there's some comments and questions. Councillor Ricky Knight, Councillor Lever.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I appreciate this is
I mean, I have too much to say on this because it's my portfolio, it's my passion. And I'm so glad it's been brought forward. No offense to finance experts in the room, because they're vitally important as well. It's interesting, isn't it? To me, this is the most important issue that confronts us today, is how we deal with the loss of our planet, if you want to put it in big words. First and foremost, thank you for this report. It's excellent. It's a no-brainer. Recommendations are straightforward. You know they're going to be accepted with pride from our point of view. We've got 6 LNRs in the biosphere. Our pride and joy is Yowtown Woods. Oh, I must refer, on Saturday in the library, there was a presentation from the Exeter Science Centre, and they had an infrared camera looking at parts of Barnstaple. And the best part of Barnstaple, by far, apart from the graveyards, was Yow Valley Woods. That's our BNG. You know, that's what we use for our offsetting, as if you like, planting trees. And it's interesting that the vast majority of respondents in the consultation were 65-year-olds plus. Yeah, and from householders, I mean, very few from other bodies, very few from councillors, etc. That's because we're so busy. But and that also is a pointer that householders who want to get their own, make their own exemplar of good practice by getting their own households planting bee-friendly plants. And we do it here. You know, it's great. The first thing I saw when I joined this council was that beautiful meadow outside the door there. And we're doing it all right. The air pollution report that came to us. Great news. And what we're doing with No Mow May and our roundabouts and our verges. So in the point of view of this council, we're doing it all already. We all want every individual household, since the majority responders here, to do exactly the same in their own gardens. You know, from the locally, thinking globally about what on earth is going. The reason I say that is because Councillor Peter Lever and myself had a pretty intensive session with the LGR last week. Last week, was it week before last? Looking at hoping to become what we carbon champions or whatever. We are now, yeah. Well, it was absolutely front and central to everything we care about. Of course, we care about budgets. Don't get me wrong, but I leave that to the experts. I'm not an expert on this either. But the reason I'm referring to this is because the government has hidden a vitally important report. It blocked it from being published. It should have been published last November. Please excuse me, bear with me on this one. It was titled Global Biodiversity Loss, Ecosystem Collapse, and here's the important bit, National Security. Now, I've spent, over half my life knocking at a shut door on this, because people just think you're a little bit bonkers worrying about this when there's far more important things to be worried about. But in this instance, we've got MI5, MI6, GCHQ, we've got MOD, we've got all the big wigs, if you like, the credible inputters telling us their key judgments in terms of high, and I will finish off to that, sir, please, if you don't mind, because this will go through, so bear with me. The key judgments, the 7 key judgments, 3 of which were high, global ecosystem degradation and the collapse threaten UK national security and prosperity. There's your budget for you. The other high value was critical ecosystems that support major global food production areas. This is North Devon. Food production and impact global climate, water and weather cycles are the most important for UK national security. Unfortunately, you can imagine I've got loads more on my phone, but I won't. Now's not the time. I just hope people can access it. It's been published after a freedom of information insistence from amongst other. Well, it doesn't matter. But anyway, it worked, and they gave up. But it's been heavily redacted. It's been heavily redacted with some of the most painful inputs. A lot of them referring to unprovable aspects of eco collapse, if you want to call it that, like the melting of the Himalayan glaciers affecting Pakistan and India. I mean, this is relevant to us as individuals, even if it's not relevant to us as a council. The Amazon rainforest, etc. So critical ecosystems collapsing. Ecosystem degradation is occurring across all regions. Every critical ecosystem is on a pathway to collapse. Irresistible. Is that a D? No. Irresistible loss of function beyond repair. Tipping points have been reached, and it's happening now. We used to talk a lot when I started, well, 30 years ago, we used to talk a lot about mitigation, yeah? About adaptation, no, about mitigation, how we can stop it from happening. Well, it's happening, it's happened, and all we talk about now is adaptation, which is tragic but inevitable. We're going to have to adapt to a whole new world. And sorry, I've been off on one, but your report, I know you can't really refer to that, but look out for it, please, because everyone of any import on this aspect, where we're at the moment, had an input, and they tried to smother it because it was too negative and too worrying to the public. It's worrying, okay. Anyway, I compliment your report, and I wholeheartedly move that we accept it. Thank you, Chair, for indulging me.
Thank you, Councillor Knight. Your obvious passion shines through there. Thank you very much. Anybody else would like, Councillor Lever?
I would like to second the motion. I actually agree with everything that Councillor Ricky Knight has just said. I do have a question, and actually I've got in front of me that very document, the National Security, Global Biodiversity Loss Ecosystem Collapse and National Security. It's quite a frightening read. So if anyone hasn't read it, it's worth having a look at. It highlights actually that out of everything that we do, you know, we might be talking in detail about recycling rounds, this, that, and the other, but actually globally and impacting on what happens local to everybody in the future, this stuff matters more than I even know how to express. But if I do have one question for Mark, if that's okay, which is at 4.8, paragraph 4.8 on page 427. A fun weekend reading all this lot. But it says here that local planning authorities should consider how local nature, LNRS priorities, actions and mapping are reflected in local plans and development management decisions. Good. But I'm wondering about the word should. Is it that they should? Can planning authorities wriggle out of this? Can they just say, oh, it's all too difficult? So I suppose it's about the weight that can be put on this within local plan preparation and indeed planning application decisions. That was a question. But I also wanted to just reflect that it was an absolute joy over the weekend, whilst working our way through this huge numbers of papers we had to do, to actually have a look at this stuff in some detail and to read about ancient trees, about rotting wood, about butterflies and their importance. And what a welcome change. I wanted to thank you and everybody else that has been involved in this. And I particularly wanted to note that in the way that we've just been responsive to public consultation, that on the last item, that what is really clear is that the public consultation that went out there about the website has been listened to, and there have been amendments made to it to make it an easier tool for people to use. And actually it shows the value of us working with the public out there to make the best that we can. Yeah. I am really very happy to second this motion and really just to thank you, but I've just got that one question about planning. Thank you.
Okay, very quickly. I'm only asking this as a paragraph 13 question. Now, what is a paragraph 13 question? It is when you find out about 3 years later that you've signed something and something that you can't do what you want to do today because it'll contravene paragraph 13 of something you agree. There was a massive battle over mowing about half acre of grass. I'd just like some reassurance that's not going to happen again on the back of this. I'm sure it's not, because this is a much higher level, but there isn't a paragraph 13 in here that stops us from mowing a specific piece of grass, and you know what I'm talking about.
I can tell, could perhaps say something on this. Do you want to come back in on that, Mark?
I think, you know, and you've just said it yourself, really, Councillor Crabb, it is a much higher level document than that. So it's more of a tool that can be used with planning. I don't think there's anything in there that's going to be
Well, I shall
specific.
I shall note your public reply with enthusiasm.
Thank you.
Leave it on that.
Just want to say one of the joys of this, without going into what's happening globally and how important it is that we act locally to make these to bring this in and make these changes, is that this is a map based thing. I love a map, and I haven't looked at Ilfracombe on the map, but I will be looking very soon to see whether that particular piece of grass is identified as something that's important in the local nature recovery strategy. And if it is, then that's one issue. And if it isn't, then you carry on mowing.
The mapping is the biggest weakness, actually.
Mapping, the mapping is, I mean, on a serious note, the mapping is absolutely fantastic. And I think for lay members of planning and other committees to be able to have this information readily available on a map is so much better than having it hidden away in documents and reports and things. That is really good. Thank you. Oh, you were going to answer the other Caroline Lever's question about how important this is.
Sum up those two questions really about the grass cutting in Ilfracombe, generally the weight given to sort of planning decisions and things. The legislation supporting the LNRS is quite explicit that it's not a constraint to be placed on planning. So the LNRS itself is evidence, it's contextual, it's mapping to be used to inform local authority policy. But obviously, if we build in policy within the local plan that reference elements of the LNRS, then additional weight would be given to that at that stage, but not based on the LNRS in isolation. That
does help. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's been a proposal by Councillor Ricky Knight to accept the recommendations 2.1, 2.2 on page 426, seconded by Councillor Caroline Lever. Can we move to the vote to accept those recommendations? All those in favour? Anybody against? Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. And we'll move on to item 7. Cinda.
Morning, Chair.
Morning. Review of the report and then any questions and we'll do recommendations.
Good morning, Chair, morning members. This report provides an update on the delivery of the corporate plan for the Q3 of 25-2026.
I'm sorry, Chair, I'm really struggling to hear you.
Speak louder.
Put your voice over.
So just don't worry if you're shouting out.
People keep changing the signs.
Carry on.
Just speak loudly if you may.
Of course. So this is your Q3 update for your performance against the corporate plan. If we start with housing and community safety, planning permission has been secured for all 3 properties as part of Ilfracombe Healthy Homes. Despite this positive milestone, unfortunately, the appointed architect ceased trading at the beginning of January. The project team are now working through steps to mobilise a new architect. We have successfully secured 1.2 million from Homes England to support delivery of social housing at Balfour Street linked to the future High Street Fund projects. An expression of interest has been submitted under the Local Authority Housing Fund for round 4, and we await feedback of that bid. We have completed emergency planning training for staff to respond to critical incidents. We also have recovery training now scheduled for this quarter. A project initiation document has been reviewed and supported by SMT for the Renters' Rights Act. The project team are managing the outputs and associated risks and meeting regularly. The LGA have recognised our case study of our partnership with the Freedom Centre and is a positive piece of work. Now that we are a registered local authority provider, we're working closely with North Devon Homes to ensure management of those properties moving forward under our local authority housing company. Moving on to regeneration and economic growth, we are reaching a major milestone on a number of our regeneration schemes in the next quarter. Firstly, with Future High Street Fund at Balport Street, this is scheduled for completion in April. It will bring forward a range of workshops, function rooms, bar and social housing. You can see a couple of photos embedded in the report showing the scaffolding removal. Once phase 3 of, once the building opens in April, phase 3 of the car park central will commence, and that'll be sort for an 8-week period. Moving on to Seven Brethren, the flood defence works are ongoing and similarly due for completion in spring this year. Internal road construction for the residential development has commenced. Moving on to Cultural Development Fund, our partnership work with Bridge Chambers continues and is also due for completion in March. Moving on to customer focus and digital transformation, we have now introduced Appendix B to the report, which provides an overview of all the process mapping we're doing among service areas. We are also testing an AI-generated key performance indicator measuring customer satisfaction through the sentiment of calls handled in our customer service centre. This will be formally reported in the first quarter of 26-27. Moving on to environmental enhancement, we have successfully delivered the solar PV at North Devon Crematorium and will continue to monitor its performance. Now this project's complete, we'll move to the project planning for the solar office building at Brinsworthy. Finally, moving on to organisational development, work continues to prepare for the LGR through engagement, training and readiness assessments. That concludes my presentation today. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Lucinda. Very thorough, and I think one thing I take from this is there's so much going on that we can shout about and say this is what North Devon Council is doing. And I'll just pick on one, which is the solar panel thing that Ricky Knight and those on his committee have been pushing for, and I think it's fantastic that we're moving forward. Can I, before we move on to questions here, can I just check time-wise? We're having sandwiches, aren't we?
Yes.
Is there a time when we've said we're going to break? If we said 12:30, 1 o'clock, or?
In terms of the time, and the meeting can carry on for 3 hours, and needs to be a resolution to continue past that time.
Right, okay. To be aware. Thank you. Councillor Maskell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your report. I'm just looking at the page 75. 74, 75, the talking about affordable housing, and it mentions Braunton and it mentions the stalled site at Bellator. You don't mention any of the other stalled sites in Braunton, which I think at Mariners Court and Pill Gardens are. We don't seem to be getting any progress on those sites either, and it'd be good to have some update on those.
You want me to come in, Chair?
Yes, you can go forward, Nina. Thank you. Nina, do you want to come forward?
Much more loudly.
Capable of speaking loudly. So in relation to those two areas there, we had a meeting with North Devon Homes on Friday. Clearly those are their properties within their portfolio, just to understand their direction of travel. They went through quite a lot of detailed conversation with us and the limitations and the issues that they've got around those sites. So I didn't think it was pertinent for us to put their business into our report, because in essence this is a performance report around our areas. In terms of Bellator, we're having ongoing discussions with the developer there, and we've got further clarification questions that we're seeking within our property team. So it is a bit of a balance, Councillor Maskell, as to how much we put in those reports and we don't. And also some of it is commercially sensitive, or they're not. But if you've got any questions outside of this meeting that you'd like to bring to me, I'm very, very happy to take those.
Thank you, Nina. And I think that applies to all councillors and if there's anything pertinent to their ward that they represent on housing, then Nina, I'm sure, will be willing to answer any particular questions. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, I've got Councillor Katrina first.
I thought it was really impressive, because as well as all the stuff that's just been run through there, the number at the back show that all the basic day-to-day nitty-gritty stuff the council deliver is being delivered well, because planning determination speed is up, the speed of processing housing benefit payments is improved, recycling is estimated to increase by about 3% compared to last year, which is really good. So I'm happy to read the report.
That's
I was just going to say, I can remember the time when we had teams and teams and teams of people that would deliver these sorts of projects. We're actually doing it now with just 2 or 3 really, really good professional officers. In my portfolio, to deliver this for a small district council, I think is just fantastic. I take no credit for it. It's the staff that do the work on it. We just got to keep being brave and intervening, and hope later on today we make another brave decision. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, very, very quickly. I actually accidentally met Councillor Prowse in Barnstaple just before Christmas. It was an absolutely fantastic day. Beautiful, beautifully sunny day. Yeah. We just
and then it all went downhill.
And then you're ready.
We looked at the new buildings in Balfour Street and how they just look fantastic. And I think the decisions that were made on 37 Balfour Street to bring that into the buildings that surround it were absolutely fantastic. And I think what a credit to this authority to have been involved in a project like that. I think it's just fantastic.
And Pure Communications work on this project because there's so much, as I said before, to learn about. Any other questions? Can we move to the recommendation? Bring us to the recommendation. Might be wrong, but could be 2.1. All in favour of the recommendations? Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Lucinda, for that. Much appreciated. Move on to item 8. Is it none or second, Chair? Thank you. A brief introduction to income officers. Councillors have all read it, obviously, and very briefly, I know we've been asked questions of
Absolutely, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. I'm here to present the Q3 financial management report. Recommendations in 2.1 to 2.5. Firstly, briefly like to talk through revenue. The revenue budget for 25-26 approved at full council on 26th of February 25 at just over £18 million. The forecast budget surplus as at Q3 is £71,000. The variances making up this small surplus are shown in Appendix A. I'm just going to touch on some of the main variances within that appendix. The planning fees are performing above budgeted levels for Q3. We're now estimating additional income to be favourable by £68,000. Penny market income is down by £74,000. General store income is forecast to be £34,000 down on budget, although store income is slightly up on the 24-25 actuals. Events income is currently forecast to be £40,000 down on budget. For the future, a working group is looking at how we can increase revenue activity. Pay and display income is forecast to be down by £160,000. The deficit is partly offset by forecast additional £57,000 income from season ticket, resulting in a net reduction in car park income of 2.6%. Recycling sales are now estimated to be down by £80,000, predominantly due to lower volumes of originally budgeted for high-density polyurethane plastic, which sells for considerably more per tonne than normal plastic does. Green Lane's net rental income is forecast to be lower by £206,000 due to rent reviews and loss of a major retailer. This net reduction is in line with our original cash flow projections. There's a table detailing these in 4.1.9 of your report. But the overall net rentals still cover the borrowing costs and asset management fees as originally set out. Business rate growth is now estimated to be £200,000 greater than original budget, and the uncommitted element of the collection fund reserve is just over £550,000. and this gives us some protection against future volatility in this area. From the overall forecast Q3 position, we're proposing to contribute 350,000 to the repairs fund and 120,000 to the budget management reserve. These reserve changes, along with other reserve movements and balances, can be found in Appendix B. Moving on to capital, the 25-26 to 27-28 capital programme is attached to Appendix D. The current capital programme for 25-26 stands at just under 17.9 million. We're proposing overall variations of just over minus 190,000 for the 25-26 capital programme and just over 656,000 to the 26-27 capital programme. All details can be found in 4.4.3 of your report. Within these variances, there are 5 new capital bids put forward by officers. They were scored high by the project appraisal group team and recommended for approval by senior management team for inclusion in the Q3 report. The table on the top of page 123 shows the schemes in more details, including how they're funded. Column 2 shows the total cost of the bids. Column 3 and 4 shows how the bids are funded from earmarked reserves. And the last 3 columns show the annual impact of borrowing on the revenue budget.
So what does the middle column, life, refer to?
That's the life of the asset and the length of time that the asset would depreciated or borrowed over.
The Limbridge car park's got a 10-year lifespan.
That's in line with the life within our assets at the moment.
It's
the remaining life pending valuation or works required. These changes take the revised capital programme to just under £28 million. Capital programme is funded by 150,000 capital receipts, 13.3 million potential borrowing, 12.2 million external grants, and 2.1 million of our internal earmark reserves. The actual spend at the end of Q3 was just over 7 million. The release of funds for this quarter can be seen in 4.4.8 the report. And members, that concludes the brief presentation, and we'll have to take any questions.
Thank you, Tony. Are there any questions? Very quickly, just one thing for all members. I remember this coming up last year. If there are particular questions on a report like this, particularly when it's pertinent to your ward, can I ask that we all try and endeavour to contact people like Tony before this meeting, because otherwise it tends to get clogged up with smaller questions that could have been sorted before the meeting. We've all had the report for at least a week now, if not 2 weeks. Some questions could be asked, but happy to go around. Just a reminder, that gentle reminder. There was Councillor. Is it Councillor Grab? Sorry.
Yes, it's having said that, I haven't had my hand up. So can I ask an incredibly petty and ludicrous question? You mentioned in 4.1.9 about the rentals being £206,000 down. You give a range of 1150 to 911. Do you happen to know off the top of your head which of those 2 numbers we're closer to if we're in range?
I can answer that, Chair. So table in 419 is the original table that we brought to members back in 2021 when you made the decision to acquire Green Lanes. The reason you had a net rental lowest and net rental highest is because not all the rental agreements finish on the 1st of April. So it's always going to be somewhere in between that, because a rental agreement may finish in September. In terms of where we're projecting it to be the current year, it's on the upper end of around the 1.1, because we've got about 830k's worth of rental income, and then we have the car parking income that's generated as well, which is about 380k.
Okay, good. Any other questions, Councillor Caroline Lever?
You've lost Ray and Ryan, eh?
Chaps, Councillor Caroline Lever.
Thank you. Thank you for the report and for the presentation just now. I'm interested in the car parking revenue. Am I right in thinking that because we have moved to a system where we have Ringo, so people can pay on their cards, and actually one of the things that's happened is that people are not being caught out by, oh gosh, my parking is about to run out, oh, I'm going to get fined. So is the reduction in income about people not being fined? Is that a significant part of that? And if so, although it means less income for us, that would seem to me a good thing for people. who are trying to use our town centres. I don't know if I've understood that correctly.
I'm not Chair. So yeah, it's a combination really. Obviously with Ringo, you're paying for the time that you're there, whereas previously before we had Ringo, people may have overpaid and put in for longer. So it's a good thing from a customer perspective. Obviously from a financial hat on, I'd rather people overpay and we have more income coming in, but it is that balance. From a town centre perspective, obviously the option with Ringo is you can extend as well. So obviously if people have that option, if they are getting close, they get notified that their car parking is coming to, and they may choose to extend then for a further period of time. So there is a mixture there in terms of why maybe incomes come down, but obviously part of it will be that you are now paying for the time that you're there. The other thing also, we did introduce in the council the half-an-hour charges as well. So again, that would have had a negative impact on the budget because where it would have previously paid for an hour, now they're paying for half an hour. Maybe if they're just popping in to collect something. Again, that's good from a customer perspective, and town centre because hopefully people are buying from the shops and picking something up from there. There'll be a combination of things as to why the income is down slightly, but we are looking at about a £4.5 million budget. So it's a small percentage in terms of the overall picture.
So sorry, my specific question is about fines.
And in relation to fines, yes, there are less parking fines now because people are paying by Ringo, whereas previously that would have been a much higher figure. So we have seen a reduction in.
Here's another example of how we're supporting the town centre, but also the people of North Devon and indeed tourists who come here. So we get the financial hit a little bit, but they get a better service, which seems fine to me.
And the parking officers are there to support.
Yeah.
So rather than just going in there heavy-handed with fines, they are there advising and providing that customer service to customers in the car park and advising on what their options are.
Very positive from my point of view.
And to clarify that, we've never given our car park wardens targets to issue tickets or anything like that. We always take the view that they're there to assist the public rather than fine them.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Councillor Ricky now.
Reluctant moment. Yeah, well, as usual, I'm bewitched and befuddled by your report. Thank you very much. Very thorough. And so my lame brain eyes go to the losses, Green Lanes, Pannier Market, pay and display, recycling, etc. And I wonder, am I a worried man? I mean, particularly in terms of Green Lanes, I appreciate that that's our very important revenue maker for us. So I worry about the losses. How serious are they? Yeah, that's all their question.
Not serious in my view. The Green Lanes were expected reductions. So when we bought the centre back in 21, we expected the cash flow to come down in line with that table. So it's in line with what we originally said. In essence, it's probably better than that because we have lost a couple of major retailers within that as well that wasn't expected. So River Island, we know obviously are closed. We're hoping to get a prospective tenant in there. I can't mention names at this stage, but hopefully there'll be a new tenant going in there. So that will improve that position moving forwards. And we are then pretty full then in the remainder of the centre. So it's still paying as it originally set out to do. It's contributing to the council, even with the borrowing costs being covered. We haven't actually taken on all the borrowing for the centre either. So actually that's an even improved position from where we were originally as well. So we've only taken on some of the borrowing. When borrowing costs come down, we'll then take on the further level of borrowing. So we're doing that. Hopefully when they come down. In relation to the other income sources, car parks is a small percentage of the overall budget. We had built in some additional income we thought might come about, but that didn't materialise. So that's why that's slightly down on the target. The Pannier Market we've touched on in previous reports, so I won't touch on that again, but there is a separate working group following scrutiny and policy meeting that are going to have a look at the Pannier Market, revisit the business plan and hopefully look to improve that position moving forwards. And the recycling income, we are subject to market prices on that as well. The baler that we've put in hopefully was going to improve the quality of recycling material coming through. That hopefully will start to come through now in the next financial year. So we'll hopefully see an improvement in the markets through the implementation of the infrastructure that you invested in the last year.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
That's easy. Thank you.
Okay, can we move to recommendations 2.1 to 2.5? So we move, Councillor Petrina's moved, seconded by Councillor Hunt. All those in favour of accepting the recommendations? Thank you. Thank you, Tony. Move on to item 9. Sarah, you doing this?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Good morning, councillors. This is the annual council tax reduction report, a very nice short report for you all today. No changes proposed for the new financial year. The only aspect to take note of is the operating amounts for each of the bands. This is based on the consumer price index, which is what benefits are also based on as well. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Sarah. Councillor Caroline Lever.
Fantastic, wonderful report. I propose the recommendations as set out in the report. Thank you.
Do we want to comment at all on the report? Okay, we'll move to the recommendations. All those in favour?
Have we seconded it?
That was seconded by Councillor Vicky Knight. All in favour? Brilliant, thank you, Sarah. I don't know what's on these sandwiches.
That's going to present a financial report.
We'll do the budget in the same time.
Cool. Item 10, review of fees and charges for services. Is this you again? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm here to present the fees and charges for 26-27. Recommendations in the report 2.1 to 2.2. The guidance this year is increased some fees and charges by 3%, although some are set by statute and some are set nationally. Any variations to the 3% are explained in a little bit more detail later on in the report. The 3% increase has been applied to allotments, building control, sports pitches, pannier market, pre-application planning fees, event licenses, contractor licenses, and modifications to Section 106 agreements. Variations to the 3% include environmental health fees. Majority of these are set by statute or to recover costs, and where allowable, a 3% inflationary increase has been added. Cemeteries, increases of around 13% have been applied to ensure the cost of providing the service is fully recovered and to start the process of bringing our charges close to the level charged by neighbouring authorities. Garden waste charges to increase by a fee of £5 to ensure the cost of the service is recovered. Dog waste charges include a 5% increase to cover the cost of the increased cost of providing the service. Street nameplates, no planned increase 26-27 due to the previous year's reset still being appropriate. The net effect of all the changes mentioned result in a net increase in income of £109,000, all of which has been built into the draft 26-27 budget. That concludes the report. I don't know whether John wants to come in because normally we'd have the trade waste schedules in there.
So I'm not letting him in.
Groundhog Day. Thank you, Chair. Obviously, members, you debated the trade waste subject matter earlier, and obviously your motion has been recommended for approval is obviously to retain the refuse element, including the Schedule 2 adjustments that you spoke about. Obviously will require an increase in trade waste charges. As Tony alluded to, the trade waste charges would normally be on here. They're not at the moment because at that stage of producing the report, we weren't sure where the trade waste service was moving to. In light of the conversations earlier and the table that I showed you, which hopefully you still have a copy in front of you, you do need to make a decision about the level of charges for next year. Today, in terms of recommending on to full council. So obviously you have two options. You could look to make a recommendation on the full council, and also we need to incorporate that within the budget that we're going to talk about on the next agenda item. The implication is obviously at the moment you don't know how much that customer base has been affected by the last month's activity. So we alluded to earlier that potentially there could have been some reduction. Some customers have obviously been in contact with other providers, and some we know have moved across. We need to take a view in terms of making sure that the budget is protected and at least recovering the cost of the minimum set out in your motion. So therefore you do need to make a decision about what you're putting forwards to full council for approval at the end of the month, because you're formulating the budget as part of your conversations this morning.
So I just I think members are going to find that quite difficult to actually just come out with something without knowing. I mean, is it a possibility that this could be delegated perhaps to myself councillor Prowers and councillor Crabb to look at closer to the budget?
Yeah, so obviously the final decision will be at full council on the 25th. That's when you'll make your final approval of the charges and the budget. But obviously you do need to consider what your likely increase will be. Now, even by the end of February, you may not necessarily know what that loss of customer base will be, because some may have jumped already to other providers and some may be obviously still in conversations with other providers. So
could it be amended out? If we go for a very high one and then it proves the year's contracted perhaps too high, we can take that as we're making a bit of a profit, being commercial. Or what I don't want to do is be setting a figure that's going back again to saying, well, we're going to lose money on this over the course of a year.
Yeah, I think with any fee setting, obviously you've always got that risk. The customer base can change on any service. So again, obviously it is an estimate. But what you will need to build into your draft budget for approval at the end of February is your gross expenditure and gross income. So that needs to have an informed view of what you're likely to put the fees up by. So you will need to be making that decision in advance of the council meeting at the end of February. You can't wait until the full council meeting to make that decision.
I know Councillor Petrinos wants to come in, but on this specific thing, which I think is important, does anybody want to say anything? Go on then, Councillor Petrinos.
It's a separate thing, not what I was going to originally say. I've got a vague recollection, it's probably incorrect, that the length of the trade preference contract, is that 3 months or is it a year?
It's a 12-month contract.
It's 12 months. Yeah. That's a pity. Or we change to like 6 monthly to give them flexibility to change prices partway through the year.
Could that be done?
Yeah. It can be done, but it's a lot more difficult in terms of managing those contracts, managing the invoicing, such as everything will have an implication. So normally it's a 12-month contract. And yeah, we haven't varied from that in the past. But again, any change of that will have an implication, because it would mean the finance team having to do quarterly billing. And also you will need to make decisions in terms of varying prices for the year, which will become quite complicated because if you decided to go 3 monthly or 6 monthly, depending on whether what you want to do. So it would add further complication to a system that's there. It would also add, I think, a lot of uncertainty for businesses as well, because if you went back to, well, we're going to have a look at this every quarter and then vary charging, that becomes a lot more complicated, not only for us, but also uncertainty for businesses. It would be much better to say, we're going to put in the prices to this for the year. You then provide that certainty to the customers. And I think, bearing in mind what you've been hearing from the feedback from businesses so far, is that a lot of the competitors are significantly higher than where we are at the moment. Even if you did make a decision to put prices up by 34% or 46%, if that made the trade waste account go into surplus, that's not a bad thing, because you can make a profit on the commercial element of this business. That may result then in you making a decision next year not to put prices up for 27, 28, which actually is then a good thing in terms of supporting businesses. So there are some positives of doing that. I would just err on the side of caution if you wanted to be
advocating going for the higher one, John, to cover ourselves.
I think it's only, again, it's very hard without knowing the numbers, but obviously bearing in mind the numbers that we know have been in conversation with providers. If we're looking at the 300 to 400 customers that have, that equates to sort of 25 to 30% of our existing customer base for the ones we do know about that have had conversations. There could be some that obviously we don't know have had conversations yet. So that's why we were sort of leaning towards the 30 to 40% customer reduction.
I think the presenter of the motion talked about he'd been contacting it and he couldn't find anybody that was less than 70%. So, you know, that's the bottom line. If they're talking about 70%, then we can go for anything below that. I would suggest and still keep the customers. If that's what they've been told, 70%, they'd be saving money if we raise it by 60%. David Knight.
Yeah, I mean, previously we did discuss this, and I really respect John Triggs's skills in the finance of the Devon Council. He did allude to perhaps pointing towards 40% for a safe kind of benchmark, and I do think we have to think very carefully, and I would be supporting kind of officer recommendation that we actually do thinking along those terms, somewhere along those terms.
Councillor Caroline Lever.
Thank you. I mean, if I go back to the full council meeting we had on Thursday, I mean, what we heard really clearly from some customers is that we provide an excellent service and it is really, really cheap. Now, that seems to me, there is no reason why we should be providing a better service than the private sector at much reduced price to people. We need to produce, if we're providing a service, it needs to be good value for money for customers, but it also needs to wash its face, as we've talked about previously, it needs to wash its face financially. And actually, my feeling is that we should be going on a precautionary principle because we don't know. We just do not know how all of this is going to be received out there in the market. We also don't know how the market will respond to what we have decided here today. And, you know, we live in a part of the world where, you know, the entrepreneurial spirit is strong. You know, we've seen from the number of, you know, relatively small businesses, there are all sorts of people in North Devon who have the ingenuity to come up with a solution to anything that is out there already in the marketplace, whether that's from us as a public sector organisation or the commercial sector. So it seems to me that we are not in a position round these tables today to decide on a figure. I would really support a little bit more investigation of that with, you know, group leaders, delegate that authority in consultation with officers as appropriate. But my gut feeling is that the key driver for me is that council taxpayers, ordinary everyday council taxpayers in North Devon, do not end up subsidising this trade waste service. So I would urge, honestly, a higher level, but it's not, I don't think it should be me just going, yeah, that figure. I think it needs to be a bit more in consultation. Would you like me to propose a motion that it is that the power to decide this particular item is delegated to the leader and to group leaders in consultation with officers within a short time
I
period?
think John wants to come back. I'm just wondering, are you able to give officers a kind of time scale of when we will perhaps be able to make a better judgment or not?
I mean, our judgment, I think, will be the same next week as it is this week, because we're not going to know the exact movement in customer base. I think obviously it'd be great that we can write back out to customers today. I hope also the publicity this has given may even generate new business, because if people are hearing that our service is excellent and really cost effective, even with a price rise, I would hope actually that we get growth in the business from this. I think the key thing in terms of
John is that Councillor Lever's motion to delegate to the three of us, which I initially suggested, probably wouldn't be much use then, is what you're saying.
I think the key thing is that we need to have an informed decision by the time we write the papers for council. So that's in advance the 25th and probably next week, because that needs to inform not only the budget papers, but also the council tax resolution that sets the gross and income and expenditure. I think one option you do have is to delegate to officers in consultation with lead members to put that proposal into those papers. So you could make that decision today. I think our informed view, unless there is any concrete information coming through in the next week, would be to lean towards the 40% customer reduction.
Yeah, that sounds like a sensible.
Today, you should probably delegate to officers in consultation with the lead members that you said to put that into the papers.
Councillor Walker.
Can I just come back?
Can we just bring in Councillor Walker first of all?
Yeah, I just think that we do need to make a decision now, because what we don't want to do is say to people, oh, we're going to carry on the service, and then sort of people say, oh, we'll stop looking, we won't get a new service, and that all and then they suddenly discover that we're going to have to put the costs up mid-year. That can't happen. It's got to happen now, and it's got to be within plenty of time to be published before the full council.
Sorry, for clarity, it wasn't lead members, it was group leaders.
Sorry.
But again, I go back to the precautionary principle, because we don't know what's going to happen to customer numbers. And so my question would be, if we go for the 40%, while we're hearing that the private sector is probably 70% higher than what we're charging now, I have to say, my question will be about, okay, halfway through the year, if we discover that the 40% increase isn't enough to cover our cost, what do we do then? We're stuck for the rest of the year, aren't we? And so we then end up costing council taxpayers money to support effectively private businesses. So when I would actually rather we got closer to a figure which is nearer to the commercial kind of cost. And as has been mentioned before, you know, we don't know for each individual customer what those private sector costs would be, but I would rather go higher than 40 because we have to make sure that council taxpayers are not subsidising the service.
Councillor Crowd.
It's a question, basically. I first of all, my own personal view is I broadly support, as you know, from the leaders' meeting we had with that lovely views of Woolacombe. You know, I'm not against a high percentage if it remain. You've got to remain reasonably competitive, otherwise there's only too many customers. But on the Thursday meeting, we were told, where does this 82% from? 82% of our customers, or what was 82% of? 82% was Schedule 2.
Yeah.
So they're not, under any circumstances, we're not going to lose those, are we?
It could be mixed. I said something about the since the new food waste regulations came in,
right,
for those with above 10, it's going to be 2 to everybody. We've lost about 5%. I think I'm right in saying that 5% of our customer base, 300 customers, because we cannot do food waste. Now, I think that's going to increase because we are not doing the food waste when it becomes more stricter with everybody. Is that right, Matt?
Just to clarify your question or respond to that, the 82% was of Schedule 2 customers. 82% of them were they were Schedule 2 commercial customers, but they were on our domestic rounds. So it was of the Schedule 2 customers that we know we have. 82% of them were on the small box rounds. Most of the customers don't identify as being Schedule 2. What they will identify as is small business rate relief customers, because those are the only people that we price. You know, we don't talk about Schedule 2 to our customers, and we don't have it in our pricing either. So that's what that 82% referred to. But we are retaining those customers. That's the decision that's been taken this morning. Going back to Councillor Lever's point, I think you're right. I think we need to set a price as soon as possible, and I would go with the higher end price that allows us that, you know, allows for a full top off in customers. What's going to happen today?
Can I move this on then, Matt?
Go on then. What is happening? Because I'm sat here on my laptop trying to communicate out to the public what decision is being taken, and that's it's reasonably complex. And what's going to be happening is lots of the customers are going to be sat there seeing what's happening here, and then the next thing will be they'll be phoning us to see if they qualify. You know, are they still our customers or not? And that's going to take a fair amount of unpicking with some of them. So I think it's going to take quite a while before we know, before those businesses are all going to make a decision whether they're staying with us or not. So we're not going to be able to sit in front of you and say this is exactly what our customer base is for quite a while. I'm talking probably a couple of months, perhaps. So I think we need to set the price that allows for a drop off with customers. Hopefully we won't lose a huge amount, but 40% is nothing like the price increase that they will be facing with the private sector.
Well, as I said, they mentioned 70% had been, it was the cheapest, I think, that they'd been back. So even if we go with the 64%, we'd still be saving them money. And I think John's quite rightly pointed out that if we go at the top end and we make a bit of a profit, we can then decide in 12 months' time whether we want to reduce it or not based on what we know, because then the figures of customers will be more steady. So I would urge is to go for the top end, it's been on this sheet, and make sure that we cover ourselves. And as Councillor Lever said, we do not want to be in this situation again where council taxpayers are subsidising a service that should never have happened. It did happen. We don't want it to happen again. We're going to be concrete on that. So I would recommend the top one. Councillor Lever.
Yes, I think I agree, and I certainly propose that that top level. I think one of the things that we probably ought to be a bit careful of is that, as we heard, South Molton Town Council have managed to get a deal that's the same price as they're paying now, and they're probably 5 minutes drive away from where those people are based. So we may find ourselves with customers who are in difficult to get to locations, may find ourselves with a high proportion of them, a bit like Royal Mail of parcel delivery.
I haven't spoken to any businesses though, and I've had quite, I mean, in fact, they've all said they would pay quite happy because of the standard of service to pay substantially more amount of money. All the ones.
So
should be right in the way.
So I think that 64% rise is something that we probably ought to go for.
I think the only thing I would say is obviously some businesses have said 70%. I think we need to be cautious. Everyone's situation will be different. So some may have seen a 70% increase, as you say, some that might be closer to where maybe competitors are may not necessarily see a 70% hike, they may see a lesser. I think 40% customer reduction is quite a significant loss of customer base. I would just err on the side of caution of going for too high, because if they've got a 70% increase somewhere else, and now we're going back and saying actually we're reinstating the service and we're going to put it up by 54%, they might think, well, what's going to happen in a few months' time? And the council's going to change their mind again.
64 and 70 is not much different. But we don't have to stick to these. We go for like a 50% because
you can. These are just some options. So all we've done is try to indicate based on the existing customers, if you lost 40%, you'd need to put the price up by 46%. That would be a 46% rise, so almost going up by half. The 50% was obviously on the upper end then, but I think losing 40% of the customer base is quite a significant loss at the moment on the customer base, and that's where my leaning was going to.
For us to make this decision, because as officers, we don't know just how this is. But our priority, I think, as members, is to make sure that we are not allowing this subsidy for council taxpayers to creep in again. And bear in mind, we can reduce it next year if we want to, but I think we've got to cover ourselves completely. Businesses have all said they're willing to pay a substantial amount more. The organiser of the petition, who spoke to many businesses and got many businesses, he was the one who said 70% is what their acquaintances have been quoted to go private. So anything less than that, I think, is okay. Councillor Williams.
Councillor Crab was before me, actually, so.
It's never before you, Councillor Williams, so I'm going to go with you. He's on his side. He can come back again. Come back to Councillor
I was being polite. Right, I err on the side of caution as an ex-business owner, and I was a small business owner up to quite recent, well, 5 years ago, which in my life is quite recent. She says being only 21. I feel that we have all said that we'd like to support our small businesses. Now, to put an increase of, as suggested, 60–70% on top of what we already charge, to me is too great an increase. And I'm only speaking, like I said, I a small business in this day and age, as we all know and we all agree, is struggling. We can't say anything other than that because it is fact.
Good point, Councillor Williams.
Sorry, but I would err on the side of
caution. I think I would be moving towards perhaps 50% now, but Councillor Crab.
I was going to say, following the officer's advice, that 40% would be quite a large drop in customer base. The other risk you have if you go for the large one, which I know is tempting, but and I'm an advocate of making sure, I said in that meeting, like, keep these bloody rises topsy. I did, but I mean, I didn't quite realise we were going to go this topsy. But if it's 64% and you lose a significant amount of people, you come to the point where you've got a bin lorry running round. It's got to go to Witheridge and pick up a bin. Its next stop is in Trinity to pick up a bin, and whatever. So you can almost seal your own fate. I would say my personal view, and if 64% is the recommendation, I'd happily amend propose an amendment that we adopt the 46% based on a 40% customer drop off.
Just leave it with last one, then we'll move.
Okay, okay, so listening around the room, I mean, clearly, we don't want to make life more difficult for businesses than necessary. We're trying to make a decision to come up with a specific figure based on in specific knowledge of what will happen in the future. So there's a little bit of crystal ball gazing. So we can only make the best decision that we can, given the information that we have and our priorities. As we really clearly stated, we do not want council taxpayers to be subsidising this service, which we do not have to provide, but we have decided that we will provide on the basis that we don't cost council taxpayers. So I'm going to, I mean, looking at this at the 40% as a nice round figure, I would like to propose that we go with a 50% increase, which is again a bit on the precautionary principle about we don't know what's going to happen. If it turns out that this service makes a surplus, we can reduce prices in the future, or we could indeed direct that surplus specifically into environmental kind of.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. I'm going to stop you there because that's a proposal, 50%. Is there a seconder for that?
Yeah, the motion was 46 from Councillor Crabb, seconded by Councillor Prowse.
I didn't see it seconded. Okay, so there's two motions, the 46% or the 50%. And
I'll give way on that because it's not that significant. It's just I'll give way on that.
As well.
We'll go with 46% officers. Is there anything else you want to come back to before we go to the vote?
No.
No.
Very quick, no. Is there any little discussions you'd like? I'm in favour.
Who's all the other recommendations in the report about the other?
Oh,
yeah.
If I can just, so to give a further recommendation to what's in the report, you've got 2.1 and 2.2 in your report. We'll be adding a third recommendation, 2.3, that would be strategy and resources, recommends to council an increase of 46% in the fees and charges for tradeway services for the 26-27 financial year.
And that includes the recycling.
oh, it's been
That you approved this morning and that you're retaining. Thank you.
Councillor,
Very quickly, at the meeting on Thursday, there were some allegations that invoicing wasn't perhaps as good as it could be. So I'd want to make sure that all those systems are checked so that full cost recovery actually does take place.
I think Councillor Jones is going to have a rummage around that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously that came as a surprise to me on Thursday, so again, as far as we're concerned, this is our.
Checked, yeah.
We make sure that everybody who is due an invoice will get one and that it's recovered appropriately.
fine, thank you. So the recommendations 2.1 and 2.
I had my hand up at the very beginning. Remember,
I thought you'd spoken. So, oh yeah, I'm with you. You looked at
it was a simple question.
Yeah, go on.
We went up,
No, go on. You're quite right, but Councillor between us.
leaving trade waste to one side, forgetting it entirely.
Yeah.
Most of the charges relate to services that really public authorities have to provide. Are there any other ones that are also provided by the private sector? And if so, how do our charges compare to the private sector? I'm just thinking trade waste lesson.
Obviously, there are charges in there that are non-statutory services as well. So again, as far as we're concerned, we compare prices with private sector if it's like for like. And some of the services we provide, we outsource. I mean, trade waste, obviously. But then even with trade waste, the way we charge is different to the commercial businesses. So as we've alluded to before, so we bring back on trade waste, a lot of other providers do it by weight rather than by bin. So the way we charge is different structure wise to the way that competitors do. So very hard sometimes to compare apples with apples when that's not what's being provided. So it's never as straightforward as that. But where we do have other services that are provided by private contractors, we do look to do benchmarking and compare prices with.
Just a really quick point. I think that's a really good point. And I know on Building Control Committee, it's one of the things that we have been exercising ourselves over. And on that service in particular, that there's been consultation from government that will make a bit more of a level playing field, because certainly in that field, which is something that Councillor Prowse and I think know a bit about, is that it's impossible to know what the private sector are charging because they won't tell us. But one of the outcomes of the consultation on there is that private sector companies all have to advertise a scale of fees and charges. So at least we've got something we can compare our charges against.
Fine. Any other comments? Yes.
No,
I thought you were going to put your hand up. I was reacting. Okay, recommendations 2.1, and we've got an addition that the increase for trade waste would be in the figure of 46%. Is that the actual recommendation? Happy with the word 2.2?
It's an additional 2.3 recommendation. You happy with the word on
2.3? Yeah, 46%. Are we all clear?
Yes.
Any proposal please for recommendations 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. Councillor Lever, seconded by Councillor Hunt. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Okay, Louisa, Councillor Louisa York has been here all morning. I hope you found it interesting, and she would like to speak on we'll let John introduce it, and then Louise. Councillor. Sorry, I made a mistake. Councillor Walker.
Thank you. I'm introducing it.
You're sorry,
Okay.
Because while you do that, I'm going to have to go to the toilet.
Comes round to full council, people might actually remember that I do introduce the budget. Okay, so I'm actually really pleased to introduce this budget. North Devon Council, as all authorities do, have the legal duty to prepare a balanced budget. I'm pleased to report for the financial year 26-27, we're able to do this, especially with the forecast budget gap for this financial year, coming financial year of 1.6 million. Whilst we welcome the multi-year financial settlement, which allows us to do proper medium-term financial planning, we're very disappointed that this means a real-term cut in the authority's funding, taking account of inflation of about 10%. Our purchase of Green Lanes in 2021 continues to see a positive income stream, despite the volatility of the retail sector in line with the projections made at the time of purchase. It is not a loss-making item. It is still making a profit exactly as forecast. I think we should be really proud that our office forecasting is so good, to be honest. Coming on to chargeable non-statutory activities, they have to be a positive source of income to the authority. The council is unable to support businesses and residents with non-statutory services that do not at a minimum pay their way. This means that difficult decisions have had to be made, ending the no longer ending, changing the trade recycling, ending the trade recycling services and increasing the charges on our trade waste sector to a minimum break even, meaning council taxpayers are not subsidising loss-making service. We are also increasing the price of the garden waste bins, so that also covers cost. We have other commercial services that we do. They will make a profit. The crematorium is a fantastic example of this. There are cost pressures within housing, and the need for temporary accommodation is still at a very high level. We continue to invest in our own housing, not only saving money for the authority, but providing a more suitable environment for our residents in urgent need of housing. It's so much better for somebody who is in such an uncertain place to be in a home, not in a B&B or a hotel. Finally, I would like to thank all our officers for their really hard work. A lot of work has gone into this, and it's going to get harder to maintain our services over the next few years.
Councillor Walker. John, do you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So members, you've got the report in front of you with a number of appendices. I've got a few slides just to run through some of the key context of the Fair Funding Review, what that means for local government nationally, but also the local context in terms of what it means for us as a council. You'll recall me for a number of years coming along talking about Fair Funding Review coming, finally happened. This is now a multi-year, 3-year settlement that takes us up to 28-29. The aim behind the Fair Funding Review was to build a fair and more sustainable system for everyone. You'll see as we talk about local government, there being more money being put into the system, but how that gets disproportionate then to individual types of authority, you'll see differs across the country. So I'll just run through some of the key contexts nationally. Before the settlement comes out in November, the government announces a finance policy statement. This sets out some of the key context behind what's likely to be contained within the multi-year settlement. The main aim at the top there is around funding simplification and rolling in a number of grants that were currently in the individual finance settlements that were coming out each year into one overall funding amount. That was the confirmed policy position in November. However, the recovery grant, which was given to some local authorities, was kept outside of this spending review. So some smaller amounts of recovery grant are given to council separate to the settlement. We were one of those authorities, so that was a positive that the recovery grant was maintained, but kept outside of core settlement. There was a key finance policy element around remoteness being included in the area cost adjustment and including the costs of remoteness within the cost of service delivery. When it got to the confirmed policy position, that then got excluded. So whereas obviously we were lobbying around additional costs for providing rural services and the costs of remoteness, that was excluded except for adult social care. So it was retained for that element, but not for the remainder of the settlement. There was then some elements around population projections, and that was implemented. Business rates measurement, because the business rates retention has been reset. So you'll recall me over a number of years coming along talking about business rates growth and us retaining business rates income through growth. That was included as part of the policy position, and they were going to be using NNDR1 figures, which is the latest estimates. And then in terms of core spending power, they use a notional amount of council tax projected for what they think council is going to be retaining from their council tax raising. That was set at 2060. We thought it was going to be set at 2000, so a slight amendment there. In terms of the transitional arrangements, in terms of the multi-year settlement, the government announced certain councils would do better and gain more money, and some councils would see a reduction in funding. You may not be able to see all of that, but it just breaks it into 3 categories. There's 100% income protection on the left, greater than 100% income protection, and a 95% income protection, where lower tier authorities, such as Shire District Councils, government were looking at their funding allocations and thinking that they've got more money than they think they should have. They would then reduce that funding as part of the multi-year settlement. So a lot of Shire District Councils got by that. Some of them were announced last summer, and they had early conversations with MHCLG. A number of us, about 100 of us, were then brought into that cohort about 5 days before the settlement was announced. So all of a sudden we were then told, rather than seeing maybe a flatline reduction in your core spending power, you are now going to be brought into this 95% category and see a minus 5% on your funding. So that came as quite a surprise to us, being caught so late going into the settlement. But we're now in that right-hand cohort where government will protect us to 95% of what we had before, but we will see a reduction in our core spending power. In terms of that late announcement, we were quite surprised by that. I met with the MP, and we also met with the Minister of State for Local Government and Homelessness, Alison McGovern, because we felt it was unfair for some so late in the day. Government were then bringing a number of councils into that late reduction in terms of funding. So we've made our representations to government via a direct meeting with the Minister. We were only given 10 minutes, but we managed to get a number of points across around the remoteness, deprivation of areas within North Devon, the high costs of funding rural services, and we will wait to see whether there's any change in terms of the funding settlement when we get the final settlement that will be announced in the next week or two. If there's any updates on that, I'll bring that to full council when we present the final budget papers. But at the moment, we're working just on the draft settlement that was announced before Christmas. In terms of what the settlement means in terms of numbers, on the very left-hand side there, you've got the core spending power for the whole of England of 73.5 billion. That's increasing in 26-27 by 5.7% across the whole of the local government sector. and then increases over the next 2 years up to 85 billion by 28-29. So the movement to next year is a 5.7% increase in core spending power, and the movement to 28-29 is a 15% increase. That's across the whole of local government. So there are some winners in that, and there are some losers. Overall, there's 116 winners and 233 losers. Unfortunately, we're in that latter category. Core spending power is the government funding that you receive, but also your ability to raise your council tax locally. So this is taking into account that we're already putting council tax up to the 3% threshold that we're allowed to. In terms of those numbers, and is it new money the government are giving? Unfortunately, it's not. So of that 11 billion growth from 73 billion to 85 billion, about 9.7 billion of that comes from council tax and business rates. So it's not new money the government are making available. It's money that you would already have had in the system by increasing up to the levels that you're allowed to. There's also a level of protection in there, about 667 million in terms of protection measures that are paid for that protection of us only having a 5% reduction. In terms of core spending power, that does vary depending on what type of council you are. The lighter blue in the middle are the outer London boroughs, and the green is English unitaries, and Met districts are in the grey. They've had the biggest increases over the 3-year period. Unfortunately, we're the blue on the far left-hand side of each of those tables, only growing by 0.5%, 26-27 in some shire districts, and around 1 to 1.5% in the later years. So hardly any growth in core spending power from that 5 to 15% coming to shire district councils. It tends to be moving towards the outer London boroughs and the Met districts. Once you then take out the council tax, because that does include council tax, on the left-hand side, you'll see for shire district councils, that actually ends up being a minus 6.5% reduction in core funding. But your outer London boroughs and your Met districts and your unitaries still see growth in actual cash from government over and above them being able to put their council tax and their business rates collection figures in there. So that's the position nationally. In terms of what that means for us locally, our core spending power for the current year is £19.5 million. That was the figure we had this time last year, and you'll recall me coming this time last year and saying, actually, we've seen a 0% increase in our core spending power. So the figure we had this time last year of 19.5 million was the figure we would have had the year before in 24-25. So there was no growth on that figure this time last year. The figures then for 26-27 through to 28-29 is shown, and that's a reduction of between 2.5% and then up to 5% by the time we get to 28-29. That's a cash reduction, but obviously there's inflation in the system as well. So inflation is currently running at 3%. Even if I strip that back to the government's target of 2%, by the time we get to 28-29, that's actually a minus 10% reduction on our core spending power. So that's quite a significant reduction on resources, and about £1 million in cash terms, but actually the real terms effect is actually greater than that. And that £1 million makes a massive difference when we get to our medium-term financial plan, because you'll see me talking about £1 million budget gap for later years. Obviously, part of that is coming from the fact that we're getting less cash than we were this time last year. At a meeting, a couple of meetings ago, when we were talking about budgets and support for businesses, a couple of members mentioned about explanation of how the business rate system works, especially with some of the changes coming in. So I've just included a couple of slides here about what changes there are for business rates this year, because that does affect our overall funding landscape. It also affects businesses because, coupled with that, there's also a revaluation that's taking place for 26-27. What that means for businesses is likely increases in terms of their rateable value. So the rateable value is placed on a business based on their rental valuation at 2024. It's always 2 years behind when the revaluation comes in. And that rateable value then is what they're charged their business rates on. So a rateable value of a business, say maybe 10,000, that's then multiplied by a multiplier depending on the type of business they are. So their rateable value might be 10,000. Their rateable multiplier might be 55 pence in the pound, so their rate bill will be 5,500. That system continues, but those numbers are changing. So the rateable values potentially are going up, but there's no new money in the system. So the way it works, as you can see on that diagram there, is the old rateable value and the old multiplier is the total amount of money that's in the system. that same amount of money is in the system moving forwards. So even if the rateable values go up by 20%, the multiplier that it gets charged against will come down by an equivalent value. So what that means in terms of the money in the system is there's no new money in the system. And even if businesses see an increase in rateable value, they hopefully will see a corresponding reduction in the multiplier it's multiplied against. In terms of the revaluation across the country, nationally, the rateable values are going up by 19.4%. That's the rateable value process that's taking place by the Valuation Office. So nationally, across England, they're going up by 19.4%. In London, that's a greater figure, as you would expect, with rental values, etc., being part of the driver. So 22.3% in London. In the southwest, it's 19.6%. So obviously, that's where our rateable values would fall into that category. Quite a considerable increase from the rateable value process that took place 3 years ago, and it happens every 3 years. So in 2023, the corresponding figures for the southwest were 9.3, and now we're looking at 17.6. So rateable values are going up. That differs depending on what type of sector you're in and what type of business. So it's not 19.4% across the board in England or 17.6% in the southwest. It will differ depending on what type of category of business you're in. But that's the average across the country. In terms of what that means, as I said, your rateable value is then multiplied by a multiplier. There's a standard multiplier for all businesses of 55.5 pence in the pound currently, and 49.9 pence for small businesses. The small business multiplier stayed the same for the last number of years, as you can see on there, for the last 6 years. The standard multiplier increased over the last couple of years and was previously 51 pence in the pound for a few years, so only recently started to go up. So what will happen to those multipliers, as we've seen the rateable values going up, is we should see those multipliers come down. Process that takes is also, it needs to incorporate where there may be appeals that come into the system, because people will see a hike in their rateable values, and there's a check, challenge and appeal system in place where they can appeal against those rateable values, and we may see reductions in rateable values come forward in the future. To compensate for that, the multiplier takes that into account when it's calculated. So what that means in practice is the equivalent 49.9 pence on the left-hand side for the current year and 55.5 pence for the standard multiplier gets reduced by that 19.6% reduction in valuation. So it comes down by the equivalent amount that the rateable values have gone up by. So that should equalise the system out in terms of what business rate bills get sent to customers. There is then an adjustment for the appeals provision and also an amount of inflation that gets built into that as well. So the resulting factor is the standard multiplier 55.5 pence becomes 48 pence, and the small business multiplier 49 pence becomes 43.2. In addition to that, just to add even more confusion into the system, the government announced some additional multipliers to support retail, hospitality and leisure businesses. So previously there was the standard multiplier and the small business multiplier. For 26-27, the government have expressed they want to support the retail, hospitality and leisure sector. They have previously done that via retail reliefs that have come through. In addition to that, they've included a new multiplier for retail, hospitality and leisure businesses that's 5 pence cheaper than the new multiplier that's coming forwards. So the small business multiplier goes from 43.2 pence down to 38.2, and the standard multiplier goes from 48 pence down to 43. So that's a reduction on the existing multipliers that are being put forwards. On the other side of the scale, they also want to apply a higher multiplier to larger businesses with rateable values over 500,000. So they've incorporated a new one of 50.8 pence for those large national businesses such as Amazon warehouses, etc. So they will receive a higher rateable value amount in the pound in terms of their rateable multiplier. That just gives a little bit of background in terms of the business rate changes coming forwards, because coupled with the government funding resetting the business rates growth for us, there's also what impact that's having then locally in terms of our businesses. So that will obviously be going out to customers. There will be explanations behind that in terms of when the bills do go out around what the changes will look like for them. And also when we do our business rate consultation event, inviting businesses in next week at Node, we'll be going through this with them as well. So they're fully aware of what changes are coming and what that may look like for them. We'll also have the business rates team on hand at the same event. So if customers have got queries about their bills, we can do that on the night with them as well, so they can get an idea of what their new bill will look like. So that's next Wednesday at noon. In terms of what that looks like for our overall funding, that goes into something called a new business rates baseline. So all the growth that we've had as an authority for the last 13 years since 2013, when business rates retention was incorporated, that all gets reset and goes into a new grant that we get as a business rates baseline funding. That's incorporated into our budget now. So our budget for 26-27 has no new growth built into it at this stage. Once we get an idea as to whether there's any new growth coming forwards, that will go forwards to help us with our medium-term financial figures moving into 27-28. So looking at our numbers locally for the council, this time last year, you approved your medium-term financial strategy, and that set out our predicted budget gaps for 26-27 up to 2030-31. We were taking a view on that business rates being reset and what that might look like for this authority. We thought we'd lose a significant amount of that business rates growth. Fortunately, we've actually come out of that slightly better, and the business rate growth being kept as part of our baseline has actually come in slightly better than we'd anticipated. So that's a positive. In terms of our medium-term financial plan, we built in assumptions on pay increases, but also assumptions on the increases in council tax moving into the next 4 or 5 years. So they were built in. Pay increases were built in at 2% for 26-27. You'll see we've reviewed that for 26-27 based on where pay rises were agreed nationally for the 25-26 year. This table's in the body of your report, and this just sets out the movement from that original medium-term financial gap of 1.5 million now down to a balanced budget position for 26-27. Just running through some of those. So the employee costs we'd originally built 2% for 26-27. The draft budget for 26-27 now assumes 3%. The reason for that difference is the 25-26 pay award was settled at 3.2%. Inflation is still running at around just over 3%, and there's no indications that's likely to reduce significantly. So we're assuming a 3% increase in the budget for 26-27. That increases the budget by 244,000. If the pay award comes in less than that, then obviously that will see a positive impact on the budget. We touched on Green Lanes as part of the performance report that Tony presented as one of your previous items. The impact of that obviously for 25-26 is then ongoing in the base budget. We hope that position will improve with a potential tenant within Green Lanes. At the moment, we've erred on the side of caution and left that at the existing base net rental level. When you set your budget for 25-26, you approved the use of the budget management reserve by 164,000 as part of balancing the budget this time last year. We've assumed that contribution from the reserve coming out so that you're not using that reserve to balance the budget for 26-27. Use of reserves really should only be one-off and not being used as a continuing use to bridge your budget gaps. So we've taken that use of that reserve out, which is a cost of 164. Transfer of public conveniences has been starting to happen. Some of those toilets have now started to be migrated across to towns and parishes. It's taken a little bit longer than we anticipated in the original medium-term plan. So some of those savings have been built into the 26-27 budget. Obviously, there's a slight delay in some of those now. We're assuming that they'll all be taken out by the time we get to 27-28 budget. When we had a budget workshop, we talked about the employer contribution to the pension fund and that they've been set at just over 20% on the last revaluation 3 years ago. That gets revalued every 3 years. And collectively through Devon, we applied some pressure with the actuary to look at what those pension contributions should be moving into this revaluation for 26-27 up to 28-29. That was taken on board, and the actuary have reduced the pension contributions by between 2 to 3%. That has equated to a reduction in the employer pension contributions of 570,000 for the next 3 years out of the base budget. So that's a positive move in the budget moving forwards, and that takes into account the asset return and the assumptions on the liabilities in the pension fund moving forwards. The trade waste net revenue cost was removed from the budget. Again, that was prior to this morning's conversation. So that was either through increased charges to bridge that gap or by removing the service completely. Now that you've obviously made the decision to retain the refuse in the Schedule 2 element, we will need to put those gross expenditure and gross incomes back into the budget, but that will be at a cost neutral basis in line with this budget being put forwards this morning. The garden waste charge is going up by £5 to £65 is built in. That's still slightly less than some of our neighbouring authorities. So there's proposals elsewhere in the county. Some of theirs are going up to 70, some are 74. But our £5 increase does then go a long way to covering the costs of the service that we're currently including. Some other net changes of 13,000. And then at the bottom, we've got some funding changes. The baseline funding on the business rates came in better than we'd envisaged by 1.3 million. And we received additional extended producer responsibility grant, which is all to do with the packaging and the recycling, 481,000 as well. At the very bottom then, we're proposing two contributions to reserves for the next 2 financial years. Firstly, the current UK SPF funding is ceasing at the end of March. That's coming to an end. That funding coming in had been used to fund valued business support and clean maritime programme that was being delivered. So the proposal is to continue by putting 100,000 into an economic development reserve to continue that business support activity over the next 2 years. That takes us up to March 28, where obviously then we'll be moving into a new authority, and that would be a decision then for a new authority to take moving into 28-29. Secondly, as part of local government reorganisation, the government have announced there's no additional funding to cover that transition period leading up to April 2028-29, and that councils would need to fund those transition costs of local government reorganisation. Have been built into the finance proposals when we brought LGR to you around those initial upfront costs and when those savings would then come through in later years. But in order to fund those upfront costs, we would need to start putting some money aside to fund some of those transition costs. This proposes putting 175,000 into an earmark reserve this current financial year coming in 26-27 and 27-28, and then that contribution from the reserve would fall out then in 28-29. The costs are likely to be higher than that, is what's being estimated for some of those transition costs. So again, when we get to the end of the current financial year, if there is any net surplus, then again, there may be consideration at that point to put some of that funding into the LGR reserve as well. Bringing all of that together then bridges that budget gap that was originally identified with those cost pressures and the funding changes to then put forward members a draft balanced budget for 26-27 and zero budget cap. We've already touched on Green Lanes this morning, so I'm not going to go into much detail on this. The cumulative net return from Green Lanes since we've acquired it is just under £1 million. That cumulative net return is actually slightly higher than that because, as I touched on earlier, we haven't taken on all the external borrowing for Green Lanes. So that's outside of that borrowing saving as well. So there would be additional savings on our borrowing interest costs that aren't factored into that because we've actually chosen to internally borrow some of those costs at this stage. The net cash flow at the bottom, we've already touched on that table in terms of that was already forecast as part of the cash flow table when members took that decision in June 2021, and we'd envisaged that reduction coming down by 275,000. The proposed levels of council tax that are included in your report are recommending to put up by the 2.99% that Shire District Councils are allowed to put up by, which is £6.29 on the Band D. That would be in line with the recommendations that government allow us to, where we can put charges up to 3% or £5, whichever is the highest. The other major pre-sectors are considering their budgets at the moment, so we'll wait for those to come forwards, and that will form part of the council tax resolution that comes to you as part of your formal council tax setting and budget at the end of February for council. That just shows where the proportions of the council tax bill goes to. So 3/4 currently goes to Devon County Council, 9% comes to this authority, 11% to the Police and Crime Commissioner, 4% to the Fire Authority, and 4% to your individual town parish councils.
What might happen if the police commissioner is withdrawn? Will that just come back to us or the DCC? Then it will come to us.
We'd still go to the police authority.
Everything is changing.
Yeah.
Everything.
It'll all be part of the local government reorganisation, and chances are responsibility will go back to the local authorities in whatever form those local authorities are at that time.
Yes, that makes sense. Sorry to interrupt. That's okay.
With that brief interruption, John, do you mind telling how much longer are you gonna?
Mention sandwiches.
You idea of how long, because there's going to be a few questions, I'm sure.
We're on the downward trajectory.
That's what politicians are. You rest the tops.
Not long, Chair. It's an important matter.
It's very important, yeah.
So members, your draft revenue budget for 26-27 that's set out in your report, that's in Appendix A on page 359, which gives you a more detailed table. That gives you a net budget of 20.6 million. That's fully funded now by 8.6 million pounds worth of council tax. You've then got the new fair funding allocations, 26.7, which is your revenue support grant of just over 6 million. That includes your reincorporated business rate growth, which now comes back into core funding. Business rates baseline funding of 3.2 million. We get to keep all the business rates on renewable energy schemes separate business rates retention schemes. So any growth in renewable energy schemes that generates business rates and rateable values, we get to keep 100% of that. That's grown from 600,000 to 750,000 in the budget. The indications are that's likely to be slightly over 800,000. So actually there's a little bit of a safety net there moving forwards, but we'll wait to see what comes forwards when the business rate bills actually go out as to whether that's confirmed, and that will go into 27-28's budget. We have a small recovery grant of 270,000 and the extended producer responsibility grant. All of those funding streams then give you a balanced budget of 20.6 million. Then moving on to the assumptions within your budget, that includes a 3% increase on your salary costs, 2.99% on the level of council tax being proposed, and the garden waste subscription going from £60 to £65. One consideration you do need to give a steer on is level of strategic grants. The level of strategic grants, the base level of grant is shown there at the very end, if you can see that. So you've got grants to the AONB, the Biosphere, Mid Devon Mobility, who provide the Ring and Ride service, Age Concern, North Devon Voluntary Services, CAB, and this time last year you also provided a grant to the North Devon Records Office. This time last year we had the central fund from the community lottery scheme that brings some money back into the authority, and that yielded around £12,000. And this time last year you proposed to uplift some of the strategic grants as a one-off to put that £12,000 back into growing those strategic grants. You gave £3,000 to the North Devon Records Office. You increased the CAB grant from 45,000 to 51. North Devon Voluntary Services, you increased from 17,000 to 19,300. And Age Concern, you gave another £700, increased their grant to 5,420. That was a one-off for 25-26 because we didn't then know what that was likely to be for 26-27. The central lottery fund is now looking like an increase to 15,000 rather than 12,000 this time last year. So again, it will be for members to consider at the end of this presentation what you may want to do with those strategic grants moving forwards. Yorba wants to speak on that matter as well, so we'll come back to that as part of your recommendations. This is all shown on Appendix B on page 361 of your report. Moving forwards to your levels of earmarked reserves. That's shown in Appendix C in terms of your detailed reserves on page 363 and 364. You've got a general fund balance of 1.2 million. That equates to around 6% of your net budget and in line with the recommended thresholds. You have earmarked reserves of £5.3 million. And then one thing I have to assure you as your Chief Finance Officer is that the level of reserves are adequate for this size of authority, and the budget estimates in front of you are robust as a balanced net budget moving forwards. Moving on to your medium-term financial strategy, and this has been refreshed now looking ahead from 26 to 2031. For the balanced budget for 26-27, therefore no budget gap. We've now got a budget gap forecast for the next 2 years, which now have certainty of funding following the multi-year funding settlement. So that's been confirmed up to 28-29. So now we have a much better idea of what the funding landscape looks like. 29-30, 20-30, 31 has assumed that level of base funding continuing, but with no growth in it. It just assumes a flat line of the same level of funding, so that you've got some projected figures. But obviously, subject to local government reorganisation, 27-28, you would be setting the budget. Obviously, the new authority then would be bringing a budget forwards for 28-29 if we're working towards April 28 as that vesting date. In terms of your funding, as I've said, that core funding has been approved up to including 28-29. The business rates baseline has been reset for 26-27. Therefore, there's no growth factored in from business rates for 26-27 because the government have assumed that that has now equalised out. But there may be growth moving forward into 27-28. And also a decision as to whether we reintroduce and go back into becoming a pool again. Because at the moment for 26-27, because of the reset, there is no pool. Moving forward to 27-28, if there is growth in the system and the government allow pools, as part of the Devon-wide pool, we've been quite benefited from that over the last number of years to the tune of £200,000 to £300,000 a year in terms of growth. If the government do allow pooling for 27-28, that could yield some benefits for the future year budgets if there's growth across the wider Devon landscape and we redistribute some of that growth across the local authorities. Council tax levels I've already touched on, and also the extended producer responsibility grant that's assumed in at those levels moving forwards. And then in terms of the costs included in the medium-term financial strategy, your pay increases have been incorporated in at 2% for 27-28, so coming down from the 3%. But if that did differ to that moving forwards, each 1% equates to a further 200,000 on those figures moving forwards. Assumes no additional borrowing over and above what's included in the capital programme. Adam will talk about the Treasury Management Strategy as one of your later reports shortly. This assumes that that level of borrowing will continue and there's no additional borrowing built into those numbers moving forwards. Contributions to those two reserves I touched on coming out in 28-29, and your medium-term financial plan originally assumed a review of parking charges in 28-29, so that's been left in for that period. Obviously, there are some budget gaps there, and we know the certainty of funding. So one thing we do need to consider is what are those options moving forwards to bridge that budget gap for 27-28 and 28-29 onwards. We do need to have a mind on what the new authority in terms of the financial viability of the new authority moving forwards, and also then the consideration of our level of reserves moving into that new authority. So they're considerations that we'll obviously no doubt touch on as part of the informal session with you this afternoon and also your future informal sessions. Medium-term financial plan is shown in a bit more detail in Appendix D. That's on pages 365 to 367. If you want to see a bit more detail sitting behind those numbers. Finally, just onto the capital programme. These figures were touched on earlier by Tony, so I'm not going to go into much detail. You've got a capital programme of 27.7 million funded over the next 3 financial years. That's financed in terms of some external and internal borrowing of 13.2 million pounds. What I mean by internal borrowing is unless we need to borrow, we tend to use our own cash reserve rather than going out and getting an expensive public works loan board. That internal borrowing is more prudent for us because then it means we're not incurring those interest costs, and that saves on the revenue budget in that year. We've got assumed capital receipts of about 150,000 from some capital receipts we're anticipating. Most of that comes from like-for-like receipts that we receive through North Devon Homes. We've then got external grants and contributions of 12.2 million and reserves of 2 million. That will be the recommendation through to full council for approval of that capital programme at the end of February. The positive from that is that you've got £12 million worth of external funds coming in to fund £28 million worth of capital investment in North Devon. So you've got about 45% of external money coming in to actually help North Devon, which is a really positive position to be in. The 10-year capital strategy Adam will touched on, so I'm not going to go into this in any level of detail, but that just shows your borrowing requirement is the second dotted line at the top and the level of external borrowing that we will take on to fund that moving forwards. But Adam will cover that off in more detail in his report. Finally, the risks that are built into any financial plans. We've touched on estimates and assumptions that we need to do with the commercial waste business earlier. All the things that I touched on this morning do have risks associated with them. They are assumptions and they're estimates, and the team have obviously made those assumptions moving forward to give you a draft budget in front of you today. But some of those things can change and some of them are dependent on government policy that will no doubt change as we go through the year. In terms of where the budget goes next, we're on the 2nd of February, so it's currently at your S&R meeting. You previously set the council tax base for your number of properties for setting the council tax. This budget will then go to scrutiny and policy meeting next week, and then all comes back to full council at the end of February, where you'll approve your fees and charges, your revenue budget and your capital programme, and also then set the level of council tax for the district council. And then finally, Chair, there are some challenges ahead still. You have got some budget gaps, and that's something that we do need to consider. How are we going to bridge those moving forwards? You have obviously gained some additional income through ventures such as Green Lanes. So again, we need to consider what other new opportunities are out there that potentially could yield some revenue benefits for us. That may involve borrowing, but borrowing's not a bad thing if there are revenue opportunities that come on the back of that borrowing that pay those costs and also then provide a revenue contribution back to the council. We're heavily involved in acquiring more properties for temporary accommodation, but one option is to continue to do that and do more of that. That does save us on the revenue budget. It does reduce our need to rent properties and also our need to go out and pay on bed and breakfast accommodation. There are obviously capacities and how much of that we can do, and that's something we need to make sure we prioritise.
What's that? Sorry? LARP? Not out loud.
So those housing opportunities I'm going to come on to next. That's local authority registered provider. We've obviously become a registered provider for our units at Belport Street and the properties we're going to renovate in Ilfracombe. They'll be delivered through our registered provider model. So again, there's further housing opportunities that we can explore that again potentially bring about revenue benefits to the budget as well. So they're the types of things that we are currently doing and you may want to consider doing more of in the future. I've already touched on there may be potential growth of the business rate retention scheme over and above what's built into the budget, but we need to see how that goes into 26-27 first. And Chair, that concludes your budget presentation. The recommendations are on page 340 in 2.1 and 2.2. Any questions, Ryan?
Thank you, John. I wasn't being rude before. I just wanted to gauge how long it would be for questions and things afterwards, because this is, as you say, quite rightly, the most important document before us that we discuss every single year. Before I come to Councillor Crabb, just one small point for what you said there that stuck out to me is that 175,000 that we're having to put aside to carry out the government's work, basically on local government reorganisation. I think it's appalling that the government are not picking up the tabs for this. This was their policy. And I hope group leaders will perhaps join with me and we could perhaps write a letter for all the good it will do to government and say, this is your doing, you should pick up the tab for this. Why are we having to perhaps look at cuts in our services because we're having to spend, you say it might be underestimate 175,000 on money that, you know, is a good thing, local government reorganisation, but we shouldn't be paying, the local council taxpayer shouldn't be paying the tab for it. It should come out of the national government's funding, I think. So more of that later, but I hope the group leaders will share my concern. Councillor Crabb.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Crabb. Councillor York had given notice that she wanted to speak and then would have to remove herself.
Right.
Do we do my bit first then?
Lift it on again.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, we'll go on to Councillor York.
Okay, thank you for letting me speak at your meeting. Yeah, so basically I wanted to ask you if you would consider allocating some of the strategic funding money to Age Concern Berkshire and North Devon. I've put a document on your tables, which is another application for funding, which is a most recent picture of the organisation. So lots of really good information in there. It is a local charity, so it's not benefiting from any national central pots of money. It can't be confused with Age UK or Help the Aged. It is a local charity. It has expanded in recent years. We've had a new CEO, and it used to be just Barnstaple. Now it's the whole of the district, and actually it's expanding into more rural areas where there are cases such as in Cholmondeley or even Linton Lynmouth. You know, all of the maps on the front, you can see the expansion of customer base, or sorry, client base, and also the increases in volunteers, and they do take their volunteers responsibilities very seriously. They have acquired and investing in volunteers accreditation. And because we obviously live in an area of high deprivation, 60% of the client base are actually Care First clients and are therefore known to adult social services. So we don't charge the full cost back to the client. So we are obviously subsidising a lot of this care and support. You can see on the leaflet I've also given you, that's again for information, all the different services that they do provide, and all the prices for those services are on the inside as well. On the back of the funding application, you can see some finance information. You can see at the top, the sort of first section there, that currently they are £67,500. Yeah, 67,500 in deficit for the coming year. So, you know, I would be making a bid for some, if not all of this not national lottery, sorry, North Devon Community Lottery money. The funding landscape at the moment, sure, we're all related, you know, we're all trustees of charities here and there. The landscape is awful at the moment. North Devon itself doesn't have a lot of trust funds that give out, and those key funding streams that are normally applied to is starting to change focus slightly. There's like that, which although some of the volunteers do encounter people who've been on the end of domestic abuse, the charity itself isn't of that focus. So yeah, I just would like to make that bid really, and if it's even possible to, I know all of those other charities are incredibly worthy too. It's so hard to split the money fairly, but I would be looking for this for core funding rather than the shop mobility. I know they get a little bit for that, but it's the core funding where the need is, and even it might be possible to make them a permanent recipient of strategic grants, but I'll leave that for you to discuss. But I just wanted to give you a little flavour of what they're up to at the moment. So that's my little bit really.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are a worthy champion of this very noble charity. Can I answer your question? I mean,
sure.
The salary and pension bill at the bottom, talking about it's next year, 268,000. I wondered how many full-time employees that was, or is it one full-time employee in bits?
I think there's multiple employees, but I believe it said something about they have 4.5 FTE and 52 volunteers. So they obviously, I don't know if that includes the volunteer, no, it doesn't include the travel, the expenses, but that obviously includes pension costs as well. So it's a 4.5 FTE.
Lovely, thank you.
All right.
Any other questions? Councillor York. Is anybody? This is to do with the 15,000 that's left over in the lottery.
Yeah, community lottery.
So, is there Councillor Maskell?
Before you discuss, shall I leave? Yeah. If there's any more questions, I'm happy to try and have a stab.
Anybody want to ask? Do you want to ask a specific question?
One other thing I would say is that if at any point council or any committee would like Amanda Howard, who's the CEO, to come and do a presentation, I'm sure she'd be more than happy, just so you're aware of any sort of local developments. Okay.
I don't know what it was that I came to in November, December. Was it the annual meeting or was it just a normal meeting? I can't remember, but I was quite impressed with the turnout. There was a lot of people there, a lot of activity going on in Century Voluntary.
Yeah, there was their annual. Is that one at the at North Devon College, wasn't it?
Oh.
Yeah, they do an annual awards. There's been a lot of volunteers who've been volunteering for years and years and years.
It might be in the annual meeting actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a must go. Thank
you.
I just wanted to say that I have been and visited and met Amanda and the volunteers, and they do provide really incredible service to the elderly people in North Devon, and service which I don't think would be picked up by anyone else, you know, the things that they offer. So I would like to support this.
Yeah, Councillor Caroline Lever.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's absolutely no doubt at all that the new CEO has been in place for a number of years, has more experience in running age concern in Gloucestershire, which has been really positive for our local age concern. Actually, Ken's got his hand up, so but there is no doubt that that organisation has basically had a good sort of shake up and actually is operating in a really positive way, which should be welcomed. I go with what to do with this 15,000 quid that's come from the community lottery, and can I just thank all of those who voted for us to do that? And there was some opposition at the time, but clearly it means that there is money that we can put into local good causes, and I think that's to be welcomed. But what I would, looking at the table on page 361, thank you very much. You know, and I look at the strategic grants that we provide, and clearly since Go North Devon stopped, we've been putting money into instead to Mid Devon Mobility that provides the ring and ride service within North Devon. So it's not in Mid Devon, it's provided by Mid Devon organisation in North Devon, good thing, and into the shop mobility scheme, age concern, based in Barnstaple. Both of those are good things. But I look at the figures since 2018-19, and there has been basically no change in any of those grants. Now, what I would, but the costs, like our own costs of these organisations, have continued to increase. And as Councillor York alluded to, the funding landscape out there is very, very tough, and particularly, as probably any of you who are involved in any kind of voluntary sector or charities will know, that actually the most difficult bit of funding to find is running costs, just to keep the organisation going. So, you know, I have no doubt that we could all come up with a whole bunch of different charities that actually provide really good services for people in North Devon and make a difference to people's lives. Partly because North Devon people are pretty good at looking after and supporting and stepping up and saying, what can we do to help? All credit to North Devon people. But what I would like to suggest is that the £15,000 that we've got here from the community lottery, that we do allocate some of it to age concern, but not all of it. I would like to, I mean, looking here at our strategic grants, the one that concerns me actually is NDVS, North Devon Voluntary Services, because actually what that organisation does is that it supports the voluntary sector and charities and social enterprises across the whole of North Devon, and actually helping those other charities and social enterprises to build their capacity, to understand about how to look after volunteers properly, about how to put bids in, and actually having NDVS as the voice at across Devon for the voluntary and community and basically the non-profit sector across Devon is of real value to those organisations. So what I would like to propose is that the 15,000 from the community grants, community lottery pot, I would like to propose we split it 50% NDVS, 50% to age concern, looking at those, I lost the page, of course, the strategic grants on that we offer. This is a one-off increase, but it's an increase that could make a bit of a difference to those two organisations, rather than just focusing on one organisation and one group of people.
There's a fair proposal there. I know Ken and John want to come in, but is there a seconder for that proposal? Councillor Maskell, thank you. Ken.
Well, Councillor Lever's addressed in part what I was going to suggest, because what we do need to be careful of is that we're not allocating these funds and these additional funds just in response to the fact that a councillor has come along and spoken in favour of a particular organisation. There's other.
She has done that.
She has done that.
You know, the others haven't.
No, they haven't. But then they might not have councillors who are acting as trustees and able to come along in that role. So you just need to be aware that there are other organisations who would, given the opportunity, be equally vociferous in their representations to you about the need to allocate additional funding to them.
I think one way forward for next year is that if it looks as though we're going to get another 15 or even more, it's gone up this year, 20,000 surplus, that we know before this meeting, and we send out a letter or contact those or organisations already receiving and ask, do they want to put in a bid for, you know, specific purpose? Because what we haven't known is what specifically this money will be given to, and that will be useful next year if people want to move very hard.
Yeah, and I think Bev's going to remind us that it's now 3 hours and you need to pass the resolution. But the other option is that you leave the 15,000 in the budget and then look at how you might allocate that between now and full council. And I think John's going to suggest that.
Say that again, sorry.
Do you want to do the 3 hour thing first? Yeah, that's your 3 hours.
Then this meeting, can we have all those in favour? Do I have to suspend standing orders? Just
vote on it.
vote on increasing time to whenever. All those in favour? Is anybody against or wants to just stop the sandwiches now? Right. Is that clear? Yeah, John.
Yeah, thank you. It was just to say, so the 15,000 is built into the draft budget, so it is in there and it's in the grants pot. It's just not allocated to where you may want to put it up to. And I'm sure there'll be probably other members here who may want to have other proposals for other organisations. So the option you do have is similar to this time last year when we did the same. It was obviously you've got the information here today and you've had the information from council. You may receive other information from some of those other organisations between now and full council. You have got the option at full council to make those allocations and recommendations. Obviously, you can provide a steer today. You don't need to make those definitive decisions until you get to full council.
Can I come back?
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, I'd rather on the basis that we've been asked to make a decision about the level of charges we're going to make on a service that we don't know what the cost is going to be. Today, in order to make it easier for the budget, and it's a completely different. I understand that. Actually, I'd just rather we make a decision and get on with it, to be honest. I mean, you know, if we look at, you know, if we're giving a strategic grant to MBVS,
fine,
then we think it's.
Proposal report's been seconded. All those in favour of the proposal to split the 15,000 between those two organisations.
I move an amendment, Chair, that we don't make a decision today. I mean, I was going to speak on behalf of the North Devon Records Office, which I know may not be such a warm subject for everybody else, but we don't know about the longer term future of that. And it is important to balance all for terms. So, you know, what's
your amendment, I suppose?
Well, my amendment is that we actually don't make a decision today and we actually wait and let full council do it because they'll only challenge anyway.
Okay, seconded by Councillor between us. All those in favour.
This is just on this grant.
This is just on this 15,000 grant. If I'm right in saying, Councillor Browse, what we do is delay it to full council and give those additional time to perhaps put in a bid or have council speaking up to as to how it should be split up. It is only 15,000. Is that correct, Councillor Browse?
Yeah.
All those in favour of the amendment?
Fairness, I think.
I think that's, yeah. All those against the amendment? Okay, I think the amendment is. I don't think.
Well, that's the main. I would suggest to speed things up, but that becomes the substantive.
That becomes the substantive.
Which you take into the full recommendation on
2.1 and 2.24 and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, if we just, Councillor Crabb, sorry.
This was about 153 pages, so that was one interesting part of it. The only thing I would say, and I've said it before, and Ken knows what's coming now, we are about to take on something like, I don't know, you probably know the figures more than I do, £150 million of debt from Exeter and about £50 million of debt from Tibbet and all the rest of it. What I would say is this presentation that John's just done is an excellent example of how to maintain North Devon Council into the near future and do a marvellous job for local organisations, etc. Whatever happens, you are about to take on the debt of these other organisations. Some don't, some aren't, some are quite good. Teambridge, if we end up with Teambridge, I don't think it's got very much debt. But I still say, and I've said this before, that we need to balance our debt compared to what's coming down the line. Otherwise, our residents, our constituents, are going to get lumbered with a nice new cycle track in Exeter, which I understand Exeter Council are very happy with. But so I would say that we need to look at, or I'd like to say that John could give you some reassurance. He's going to look at average debt in the near future, and we can allocate that in terms of grants, capital projects, and investment. I don't particularly want to see more paper clips. I don't want to see new debt. But if there's an average of debt, and we can go into that so that we present to the new local authority a fair and average amount of debt, and then our people in North Devon have benefited as a result of that, I think that's something that we need to look at.
Yeah, I think I've probably responded similar last time. I think what we need to understand is what that debt's providing, because we have a level of debt within our accounts, which obviously is providing, no doubt, borrowing to fund capital projects. There may be higher debt within some other councils, but we need to understand what that's actually providing, because it may be a high amount of borrowing to fund something, but if it's returning revenue back to the revenue budget, such as they have a debt for Green Lanes, which then comes back as a revenue income. Another authority may have a very large amount of debt, but it may be bringing revenue benefits to their budget. So we need to understand.
What I'm saying.
Yeah, we need to understand what that means in terms of, rather than just going straight for the debt on the balance sheet, there may be a story behind that. But that's something we can take away. Something that has been done as part of the LGR pre-work, because obviously that has looked at the financial sustainability and balance sheets of all the other authorities. What we need is the story that sits behind that, so it comes back to the point that we can do some work around that.
Caroline Lever.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to talk about debt as well. And it is for that very point about for what purpose has debt been incurred? And I think in terms of this council, debt has been incurred precisely for the reasons that John Triggs has just mentioned. It is actually to do things which are important and positive in this area, and also which have got a revenue stream attached to them. So I think it's debt which is an example of good decision making and actually good management as well. So I think that's something we can be really positive about. I like Councillor Crabb. I don't know what the debt the reason for incurring debt has been in other district councils.
Except for Tiverton.
I'm sorry?
Except for Tiverton. They splurged it on a housing project. It went wrong.
Anyway, putting that on one side, thank you. What we do know is that the very largest debt in Devon is at the county council. And the largest bit of that is actually, although it's kept off the books, is the huge overspend on the special educational needs and disabilities budget. Now, we know that all district councils however well run they are, and I genuinely think this is a really well run authority, all district councils, all that good work, all that prudence actually will count as nothing in comparison with the scale of the financial requirements of dealing with the overspend on SEND, on the decades, as officers tell us at county council, of underinvestment in roads. And we can see the results of that, if you don't spend on your roads for 15 years, actually there's going to be problems, so I think that there is some work to be done around district council debt, how it's been incurred, and actually does it have an income, a revenue stream that flows from that, or is it, as has been the case until this year, borrowing money to pay for delivery of services, which happened last year at county council, which is not the way that we need to be going forward. We need to be prudent with what little money we have to provide the huge number of really important services to people in Devon. So I suppose on that basis, yes, but let's not forget that this organisation, we are a well-run and organisation with good decision making.
Thank you. Ken?
It's just to make the point. I mean, we were going to, in the informal session, we were going to talk about LGR and how we start preparing for it. But there's a whole load of work that we've got to do to prepare for LGR. And one aspect of it is around our respective budgets, our respective MTFSs, at the borrowing levels in each council. And those are discussions that have to take place as part of that LGR process. The discussions that are still taking place in Surrey at the moment. And as you know, in Surrey, they've got massive levels of borrowing and debt in some district councils. But it will be something that's discussed as part of that. My own view is it shouldn't stop you moving ahead to approve the budget unless you're looking to put forward an alternative budget that in somehow equalises that level of debt across Devon. And I don't think you've got that information in front of you to be able to do that today. So I don't think it stops you going ahead with it. It's something that will be picked up as part of those discussions.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Any other comments? Any questions? Can we move to the recommendation? Sorry, John, do you want to say come in? No, I thought you went to settle. Recommendations which are on page 340, and we're adding a 2.15, which remind me is what?
That was to include the £15,000 as part of the budget and to allocate it subsequently at full council.
Is that all given every?
It's already in the budget, yeah.
Okay, did somebody move the recommendations? Thank you, councillor Rivers. All those in favour of the recommendations? Thank you. Anybody against? Thank you. Right, item 12, Adam. Thank you.
In terms of our capital finance requirement, or CFR, which is the total borrowing need to finance our approved capital programme, we're projecting this will be circa 39 million at the end of this current financial year, increasing to 43 million in 26-27. The CSR has to be funded either through borrowing or internal resources known as internal borrowing. So for 26-27, the CFR of 43 million will be funded from 26 million of external borrowing, 6 million of borrowing in relation to our finance lease arrangements, and finally 11 million from our own reserves and cash flows. Currently, external borrowing, excluding the finance leases, is at 14 million. We're anticipating another 6 million of short-term borrowing by the end of the financial year, with a further potential 6 million next financial year. As you know, any large slippages to the capital programme can relate in delays to the external borrowing. In terms of our investment strategy, you'll be pleased to know we're not proposing to make any changes within the report. So I can refer you to the recommendations to section 2 of the report. Recommendation 2.2 just relates to the revised restructure of Treasury management. We now have a finance and insurance officer that's providing some day-to-day assistance. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Alan. Questions? Any concerns? Well, the recommendations are on page 373, 2.1, 2.2. Does anyone want to move the recommendations? Caroline Lever, seconded by Councillor David Knight. All in favour of the recommendations? Thank you. Anybody against? Thank you very much, Adam. And we'll move back to Adam now for item 13.
Thank you, Chair. The aim of the 10-year capital strategy is to take a long-term view of financial sustainability of the council and provide members with financial context to help them make those long-term capital decisions. Given our focus at present is on vesting day, I just want to run through the projections for the 1st of April 28. So based on the current approved capital programme, we are projecting that CFR, our underlying need to borrow to fund the capital programme, will be circa 44 million. With total borrowing, finance leases and treasury borrowing, 35 million. That means that in 28-29, the cost of borrowing for the new authority in relation to North Devon will be circa 3.6 million. The report then extends those financial projections based on known expenditure items around the vehicle placement and asset management. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Alan. Any questions? Concerns? Okay, well, recommendations are on page 411, 2.1. Move the recommendation, please. Councillor Caroline Lever, seconded by Councillor Julie Hunt. All in favour of the recommendations? Thank you. Anybody against? Thank you very much for the brevity and speed of that, Adam. Thank you. Item 14 we've done, which just takes us on to the item 15, which is the work programme, and we've already had one addition to the work programme following the motion on trade waste, I think, which is we've got to put trade waste back on every single month for an update on how it's going. That we want to sign this morning, as well as the reports from the finished group. Is there anything else that needs to be put on the schedule of meetings? Anybody want to put anything on, recommend something? Anyone can with what's on there? There's no changes to be made, is there?
We got the peer review on there.
Good point.
I was going to touch on the peer review shortly in the informal session, but we do need to put it on the agenda. But perhaps we'll work out whether it goes through to governance first and then on to Structuring Resources, and then include it for next time.
Right, so are people happy to delegate that to Ken to put on the agenda, to put on when it fits in time wise? Yeah, we do that. All those in favour? Yes. Thank you. Anything else? Brilliant. It's been a long meeting. Thank you very much.